Thank you, Doug, and good evening, everyone. Probably one of the most important things that we can tell you tonight, and we'll be laying it out, that ancient history and biblical truth has been covered up to such an extent by people you'd think would want to have the truth come out, but for very nefarious reasons, which Tim will go into detail on later, the only contrived history that we're getting is the idea, which is increasing daily, that God did not create us, that there is no God, that Jesus is not really who the Bible declares him to be, and that basically we're all generated and created by aliens dumping their waste or their DNA into the planet and watching us evolve. Fascinatingly enough, having been on the trail of biblical giants, this stuff is relevant. Again, I've said, Doug, you've heard me say it numerous times on your show, he who controls the past determines the future. So in other words, if you have the truth hidden, when you reveal the truth, you can basically publicly sway the non-thinking masses to believe anything you want to put, quote, contrived evidence for. I believe that God has raised us up and Gen 6 Productions for this time to challenge that. And you're going to hear an interesting phenomenon. By the way, if it hadn't been for a husband and wife team, Cam and Jan, God bless you guys, having the Lord speak to them literally about helping us in a big way, and I'm only saying this, we couldn't have done this. So it's interesting. Well, we're planning this and just believing God to provide the funding for this expedition, because we had one of the finest filmmakers, an action filmmaker, happens to be in Montana, guy who knows what it's like to go into the roughest parts of the world with Tim, and another gentleman that's been Tim's friend in Peru for a number of years, really a neat brother in the Lord. These guys set off on an expedition that was absolutely striking. You'll hear the details. But again, I just want to thank another brother sent us, a very lovely donations, and some people have sent us, and look, here's the deal. $50, $100 donations, thank you. I'm not begging for money. I'm just saying, by the grace of God, God will raise up the people to stand with us, because as you know, Doug, I've turned down numerous requests over the years, continually, almost monthly, to go on all the different giant shows, In Search of the Ancient Aliens. I mean, you can't name a History Channel or any of those type things that haven't contacted me, or British film crews wanting to do their spin on it. But it all boils down to the alien deception. So tonight we're going to take phone calls, but we want to thank those of you who I think will get excited to stand with us in this production, because right now Tim and Vinny, the cinematographer, got back, and they went to work editing this thing one day back. Tim was gone for 21 days. He's a father. He's got 4 children. So, I mean, he's dedicating his life to this. So with no further ado, I'll have Tim lay out why Peru is so critical to understanding the whole giant revelation in the book of Genesis and all through the Old Testament, and why it's going to play so heavily into the importance of people understanding this. See, this isn't a history lesson per se. This is a story of God's infinite love for his creation and having protected us from these beings and entities. But as men work harder and harder to unleash the very gates of hell, or actually loose the gates of hell, and unleash these things that God had basically bound for our protection, we're in for a whole different world. And I just want to say one thing about the Kathmandu earthquake in Nepal. It's interesting that we've talked about CERN on your program, Doug, and one of the first things that got toppled in the main city over there, I believe it was in Kathmandu, was the temple of Shiva. Shiva's the destroyer, the cosmic dance of death. And isn't it ironic that CERN kicks on, and the very first thing to be destroyed is Shiva? Now, in the world of the occult, they'll take that as meaning the cosmic dance of death has begun. What that simply means is they are out to destroy the old world to bring about the Luciferian new world. But in order to understand the future, you must get a grasp on the past. So, Tim, go ahead and take it, and, when you need a breath or whatever, give it back to me, but please take your liberty, take your time, lay it out, and let's just start by telling the people how literally, Peru is, if you will, the key to unlocking the whole mystery of the giants and what you guys found on your expedition.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. This was our first, basically this was our second expedition for Gen 6 Productions. The first one we went to Sardinia, and that one just happened really quickly. That was off the cuff. We've been planning this one to Peru for a long time. We knew that we had to go to Peru. I lived there, so I'm very familiar with the country, speak the language, which is Spanish. And you know, Peru's basically been the focal point for a lot of these programs on television concerning the ancient world, ancient technology, ancient aliens, and so forth. So so it made sense. It was logical to us to go there to one of our first expeditions to make it Peru. We kind of knew what we were aiming for when we set out, which was evidence of the antediluvian giants and, you know, the whole situation with the fallen angels. And I can tell you right off the bat that there is certainly that in Peru. I mean, that can be found without a doubt. The documentary we're actually editing now is going to show that there's some very strange things going on. So yeah, we were a team of three. We've been trying to keep our expedition team small, compact, so we can move quickly, kind of fly under the radar. And that was our strategy going in, and I'm glad that it was, because we got into some pretty hairy situations that we needed to, work our way out of, and it would have been difficult if we had a full production team with us. So, so basically, we started off around Lake Titicaca. We went straight to what's called the Altiplano. The Altiplano is it's the Andean high plateau. Mainly spanning the border of Bolivia and Peru, and it is the second highest plateau in the world. I mean, the first is Tibet, and this is the Altiplano is the second. Most of the time, we were over 12,500 feet. Just even where we were staying, the cities we were in. That's without even hiking up any mountains. It's just that the Altiplano is almost 13,000 feet above sea level. So it's a very, very interesting place. As soon as you get there, you notice some very bizarre things going on. For one thing, you're above the tree line, and there's very little animals. There's very little life at all. There's not even really hardly any insects, no mosquitoes, hardly any flies at all. You get it's a very desolate sort of feeling up there. But when you start getting out and around Puno, especially when you head down south towards the Bolivian border, you start to notice some very strange things if you know what to look for. Obviously, our Gen 6 team having the narrative of Gen 6 in our minds, as we always do wherever we go. In other words, fallen angels, the pre-flood world, giants, all that kind of stuff. We're always looking for very particular artifacts, very particular signs that tell us that we're in an area that might have been occupied. And one of those things is a lot of interesting symmetry out in the landscape, and that's something that we definitely discovered in Sardinia, and it's certainly apparent in the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia. There's a lot of terracing on the mountains around the area. There's actually a whole lot of terracing. In other words, somebody cut into the side of the mountains the different levels for growing, the stepped levels for growing crops. And these terraces, you'll hear like on the Discovery Channel, on the History Channel, they'll tell you that they were built by the Inca. But when you actually get out there, this is something that we discovered. By the way, Steve, I'm just going to ramble on. If you want me to point me in a particular direction, if you want me to hit particular points.
Well, yeah, I think, Tim, let's basically talk. Let's just go straight. And you know me, I always like the bottom line. We'll work backward and take questions. But one of the most interesting things was share about while you were at Amaramuru and what that is, and just that whole situation. Because I explained to Doug, what's a chance that we have a film crew at a known Stargate, and then let's take it from there, because in order, Doug, for people to get a grasp on this instead of just, jumping around, believe it or not, I'm going to try and be linear tonight. The point is that where you have the reference of giants, where you have the architecture of giants, where you have the oral tradition of giants and the bones of giants, where you have all that, you usually are in an area of a known portal or a gate. And so, Tim, share just that whole, and share, give people an understanding, because, well, Tim was there. I've shared this on your show and other shows for years on Coast to Coast, but the way that I was told that the gates work by people who evidently can work them, go through them, and whether you believe that's possible or not, when you're talking about top secret military bases and top secret military units that exist only known to each other or known to those they reveal themselves to, beyond top secret, magic, cosmic clearance. Those of you listening to us will understand this who have those clearances. The thing that we wanted to do was to go to Amaramuru. Did I say it right, Tim?
Yeah, that's one of the ways you can say it.
That's as close as I know how to get. And I want you to explain where it was, what it is, why we picked on that as one of the original, or picked that as one of the original locations. And then I want you to share, if you will, share all of the ceremonies of the shamans. Those would be the equivalent of witch doctors, holy men, spiritists, etc. And then what happened to you that night? Because I think that's fascinating. And when you're done with that, I'll explain what I think happened based on who was following you and in real time. I believe I can build the case, and you'll see this, that while Tim and Benny and Vinny were all in, camped out in an area waiting for gate activity, based on what the natives and others had told them, that somebody who was spying on them with top secret spy satellites made sure that they were interfering by sending one of the most amazing localized and focused storms. But go ahead, Tim. Now you share what it is, why we went there, and what we got on film. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, all this stuff is going to be available in a 60-minute, 90-minute DVD, but it's going to be different than anything that you've ever seen. And these are actually being produced for a television sequence of 6 of them that will be shown on a Roku channel that we're working on, and also on Tom Horn's Skywatch. And there's some other places that I met with. I flew to be with Tom Horn last weekend. I guess just yesterday I came home and went out there on Thursday or Friday, and we covered a lot of ground. But here's the thing. Where Tim was is critical to understanding the rest of this. And then, Tim, I want to get you into from here I want to take it to the fact that the most well-known artifacts that Von Daniken and all the Alien series use, they absolutely move those, Doug, from one place to another. In other words, there's the difference between pre-flood architecture and post-flood. But, Tim, go to Amaramuro, to Stargate, and just lay it out, what you observed there and what happened that night.
Okay, Aramamuru. Real quick to finish up what I was saying, because it connects to Aramamuru, all the terracing I was referencing gave us an indication right away that there was a very large civilization that once lived in the Altiplano, and everybody claims it was Inca, but when you actually get there, you talk to the archaeologists, you talk to the engineers, you talk to the professionals, they all say no, pre-Inca. So I think that there's a very large antediluvian civilization living there. So the Aramamuru situation, we had heard about that about a year ago, and obviously we're interested in Stargate. So this was an area that was alleged to be an active portal, someplace that things are still coming out and going into this thing. So we decided to go down there and investigate it. That was one of our primary objectives. And basically, the gate, this particular place, which is now called Aramamuru, is located right outside of the little town of Huli on the bank of Lake Titicaca. And you could Google Earth Huli in the Puno province of Peru, and you'll actually see a marker on the Google map that says Aramamuru. That's the location. So anyways, we went over there, and this, to describe it for people who don't know what it is, this is it's a door or a gate of some kind that has been carved into the face of what appears to be sandstone. I haven't confirmed that yet, but it appears to be red sandstone. So somebody carved this gate or this door into the rock, and basically there's not much known about it except for the fact that it's very old and nobody knows who did it or why for sure. But the ancient legend is, and we were able to confirm this with the natives, that it was some kind of a portal. It was thought to have been a portal. In fact, the Incas certainly associated it with some kind of a portal, and they didn't build it, by the way, but because they, during the time of the Incas, the Spaniards, the Spanish priests, dissuaded the people from doing their ceremonies and from reverencing the gate of Aramumudu. It wasn't called Aramumudu back then, but the Spaniard priests actually changed the name to the Gate of the Devil. And so basically in the time of the Incas, it was known as the Devil's Gate or the Gate of the Devil. And precisely because there was a lot of demonic activity associated with it. It was said that it was a portal to a demonic realm, maybe even to hell, and that demonic things went in and came out of it. So it was known as the Gate of the Devil. And basically that name, we found this out, by the way, when we went there. We were actually finding all of this out, doing the research when we were there. And it has come to be called Aramumudu in recently, basically back to the mid-'90s. So that name was kind of superimposed over the site by a tour guide over there. He's a shaman. They call him Apus in Peru and Bolivia, but the more common term for us is shaman. And he's a tour guide. He owns a hotel, and he wanted to kind of build a touristic situation around this obscure location that people didn't really know about in the 90s. So that's exactly what he did. And he created, basically, some legends were superimposed over this place. And we found that out very quickly. There's a lot of New Age influence there, a whole lot of New Age influence there. So we had to sift through. What was indigenous and what was contrived. Basically, what was old legend and what was new concoctions that the New Age community has devised concerning the Aramumudu location. The name Aramumudu basically it comes from a book that was written in the 80s or 90s by a well-known New Age guy. His name escapes me right now, but his claim was that the gate, the alleged Stargate, was a portal to Muria. So, of course, Muria was closely associated to Atlantis. So basically, Muria, Atlantis, that was a portal, a gateway to Muria and Atlantis. Now, it could be that this individual was, in fact, correct. There is reason to believe that he might have been correct in that assumption. I believe he channeled the information from some kind of spirits or something like that. But anyway, the point is that the natives themselves, interestingly enough, they maintain that basically all of these New Age people have come and brought their own legends, but they maintain their own legends that come down from their grandparents and their grandparents' grandparents and generations back. So that was what I was most interested. I wanted to know what the native community thought about that place. So the native community is literally, I would say within a mile of the actual carving in the face of the rock wall, and they all speak Aymara. The elderly people in the community do not speak Spanish. They only speak Aymara. Aymara is the indigenous language, and in fact they're called the Aymara. The people are called the Aymara natives, and that's also the name of their language. So we had with us an individual who spoke Aymara, so we were able to speak to some of the people. We got that on film. And right away, one of the first ladies that we spoke to was in her late 70s or early 80s. I can't remember, but she was pretty old. And she only spoke Aymara. And immediately she confirmed one of the legends that I had heard doing research here in the United States. She confirmed that when she was a little girl, her grandparents told her a story, and this is a well-known story. This is a very ancient story that goes all the way back to the Incas, of a group of musicians that were passing by the Aramumuru gate, playing their instruments. They were dancing and playing their instruments for some reason, passing by the gate. And I've heard different variations of this story, but in a nutshell, the gate opened. It was triggered by their instruments. So in other words, some kind of a frequency, some kind of a harmonic resonance triggered the gate. And some of the people say that one of the musicians got sucked into the gate. Others say the entire group got sucked into the gate and disappeared, was never heard from again. So that's a very well-known, ancient, verifiable legend concerning Aramumuru. But again, the Aymara people do not call the place Amarumuru. They know it as the gate of the devil. That's the name that they know that location as. It is to them the gate or the doorway of the devil. To the outsiders who come in, it's Aramumuru. To the tourists, it's Aramumuru. We found that out. So basically, our objective at the Gen 6 team, our objective was to literally camp out in front of this thing. We wanted to spend the night there. We had heard rumors that there's more activity at nighttime. People have seen orbs. There's been UFOs reported right over that area. There's been strange people reported, very white-skinned, really bright blue eyes, tall, white hair, typically what people refer to as the Nordics, for people who are familiar with ufology, have been spotted around the area, and always at nighttime. So we figured if we're going to have a chance of seeing anything, then we better be there all night. And so we camped. We literally camped out in front of this thing. When we got there, there was a group of shamans there. Again, they're called Apus in Peru, and they were doing a ceremony at the gate, which is a very common thing these days, because there's lots of tourists that come and they go, and people believe that it's an energy source. There's a bunch of different beliefs about this place, but most people agree that it's like an energy vortex of some kind, and they do their shamanic rituals there. And they were using, interestingly enough, harmonic frequencies at the gate. They were using symbols, and they were using, I don't know if you know the name of that thing I showed you, Steve, where they're with the bowl, they're running that thing around the bowl. I don't know the name of that thing.
Well, let me
but
just
it makes
help
a very
you here.
strong resonance.
Yeah, it's really interesting, ladies and gentlemen, because when all of these worldwide references to stargates, portals, even in the desert southwest, Kokopele, you'll see it on the petroglyphs, the stone carvings, a little caricature blowing a flute. It's fascinating that so many of the Kokopele representations in the stargates basically have to do with the spirals, and Tim will talk to the spiral, but it was obvious that the shamans knew that somehow they were trying to communicate with that which is behind the gate. Now, imagine this. Well, these guys are down there, Tim and the crew. We've got CERN kicking up from 3 trillion electron volts to volts, 6 trillion electron volts, and we've got this interesting phenomenon taking place around the world where more earthquakes are taking place, and big earthquakes, in a very short period of time. So it's my contention, and I think I lay this out in my book, Little Creatures on Stargates, about that sound is very important. Now, we won't get into it tonight, but you can build a case for 440A, and you can also build a case for many, not all rock and roll music, and not all forms of rock and roll music are in the same category, but the summoning of the, if you want to call them angels, demons, and they're different entities. The point being is while Tim and the crew were there, they saw firsthand the integration of sound and the shamans trying to open up that which was beyond the gate. Now, Tim, if you would, get into the storm, because this will relate directly to where we're going to go next with the spiral on the ground and everything else.
Okay. Yeah, so our objective was to stay there, obviously, all night, and we wanted to keep our cameras on the gate, especially at 12 o'clock at night. So around 9 o'clock at night, after the shamans left, cleared out, we shot some footage, shot some sequences there. After the shamans cleared out, we started walking around. I was told that there's a lot of magnetic anomalies. In fact, I was told this by a very well-known, respected archaeologist in Puno. He told me that he had registered some very strange magnetic phenomenon with his compass, that it would go haywire in certain locations. So I was walking around in the evening and after sundown with the compass, and we got this on camera, looking for any magnetic anomalies. We didn't find any, but we didn't have a chance to walk over the entire area precisely because sometime around 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, it started to rain, and so we got in the tent, set our camera up on the gate, and periodically we'd take a look outside and turn our flashlight on and, check our camera equipment, everything like that. But what happened was a storm moved in on us really, really quickly. We were just sitting inside the tent. At first it was a little bit of rain, but then all of a sudden it just began to hail. And it was really, really strong hail. I mean, it was a powerful hail coming down really hard, very dense, and just pummeling the tent we were in. In fact, it was so loud that we had to shout to each other inside of the tent. All three of us were in the tent to talk to each other. That's how loud the hail was on the tent. And usually, like here in Montana, it hails a lot, and it usually only hails for 15 minutes, half an hour max. But this hail lasted, I would say, it hailed off and on all night long, but this really strong, constant hail fell, I would say, for over an hour. It's hard. I wasn't really counting the time, but definitely over half an hour, because we were definitely expecting it to stop, kind of keeping track of the time for about a half an hour. And when it didn't stop, we started to get pretty concerned because it was actually intensifying, and we were concerned that it was going to bust a hole in the tent. And the hail was probably, maybe marble size, and maybe at the biggest marble size, and we were concerned that obviously if the grains were going to be getting bigger, we would have been in big trouble because we were exposed. There wasn't really anywhere we could get out of the hail. There wasn't any caves or anything like that, so we were completely exposed. If our tent would have busted, we would have been in a lot of pain. It would have been like being stoned to death, basically. I don't think the hail wasn't big enough, I don't think, to kill us, certainly to hurt us. But our van, we had a van that was parked all the way around the rock formation. So it's probably about 150, 200 yards to get to our van. So at one point when we were in the tent just being pounded by this hail, we had to consider an exit strategy to get out of there if the hail got bigger, or if it started falling harder and started to penetrate through the tent. Because again, it was fall. I've never been in hail like this. Again, it hails a lot in Montana, but this was crazy. The density of this hail, the constant falling of this hail. There was no remission for over an hour, and we got some of this on video. When it was done, when the main blast of hail subsided, we zipped up the tent and took a look outside, and there was a few inches of hail on the ground, as if it had snowed, but it was hail. So it dumped a lot of hail on us. Again, definitely for over half an hour, and I'm pretty certain for at least an hour, just dumping hail on us.
Well, and I think hey, Tim, let make it clear, too, that even the natives were surprised because it seemed to be very localized in your area. The reason I'm saying this, Doug, and I'm trying to paint a picture, is because when when electromagnetic disturbances take place, obviously the natives, this is what Tim related to me, I was not there, that they basically were surprised at the intensity of the storm being so localized over these guys' tent, okay? Now, Tim is watching his compass to see the electromagnetic anomaly, and obviously something's generating a very, very, when I say almost pinpoint localized storm, and the natives themselves had to come, the following morning and dig you guys and pull you out, correct?
Yeah.
So
it was a rough night. It was a rough night for the Gen 6 team. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. I don't think we slept at all. I mean, it would. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think that it's critical to understand. Now, from there, you went to explain the difference, and I want to get, again, because we're going to take questions and stuff, but I want to get to the difference between the pre-flood architecture and the post-flood architecture, and go right into the, obviously some of the findings that no one to date has ever brought out, because I want people to understand we're not just going down there to do what everybody else is doing. And later on in the show, we'll get to what I believe was one of the gentlemen that was supposed to take Tim and the crew to an area where the bones are up in the cloud forest, and I believe the guy was tampered with. And I'll tell you why when we get there. But, Tim, tell people about, I think it's really important because all these history shows, and Von Däniken, Charity of the Gods, and all the books out there, especially the New Agers, they're not really showing the whole area and how close the old architectures to the new, and how basically part of it's designed just for the tourists to see, but the really good stuff and interesting stuff is off limits, and basically they're doing their best to keep you out of where the good stuff was. Explain, the gateway to the sun and how it had been replaced or, repositioned from where it would have been, and we'll go into the difference between antediluvian, in other words, prior to the flood of Noah, and after the flood of Noah, the architecture, and, to go into the engineer's comment to you.
Okay. We met up with an engineer in Puno and an archaeologist. Very well-known both of them work in both of them are professors in the university, the National University in Puno. And basically the next day we went to Puno with the engineer. He went with us. He went with us to Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku is located right across the Bolivian-Peru border. It's on the Bolivian side. The engineer's name is Mario, and Mario's done his own investigations into the building techniques and anomalies that are found in the region, in the entire Altiplano, and all throughout Peru and all throughout the world as well. And being an engineer, he's very interested in it, very interested in trying to decipher how in the world ancient cultures were able to construct things that our modern engineers have a hard time even figuring out today. And in some cases, we cannot replicate, we cannot duplicate what some of these ancient people did. And so we took him with us. He had a theory that correlated with our own theory, which is that we believe that that whoever was building these ancient constructions, obviously antediluvian races that were under the teaching or using the knowledge and technology that was brought from the fallen angels, most likely giants building most of this stuff, that they were able to somehow change the molecular or the atomic structure of the stones, make them soft, levitate them, do all kinds of things with them in order to work with gigantic, 200-ton stones and place them with precision that is mind-blowing. So there's a lot of this in Peru. And so this engineer Mario went with us, and his theory was exactly that. Having done his own studies, he came to the conclusion that the ancients knew how to change the molecular structure of the rocks. That's exactly what he told me. I said nothing to him, by the way. This was his theory when I asked him how he thought some of this stuff was built when I first talked to him, when I first met him. That was his own theory, and again, that correlated exactly with our theory on how the ancients were able to do this. And it was confirmed, by the way, three times in total by 3 different sources for us that this is in fact what was going on. So basically, and I think in the video that in the documentary that's coming out, I think I make a really strong case for it, and I think I show some evidence that's going to be very compelling to people to at least consider that theory. So he went with us. We went to Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku, we crossed the Peruvian-Bolivian border. That in itself was a little adventure. I do not recommend that people who want to go see Tiwanaku cross the Peruvian-Bolivian border by Lake Titicaca. It's basically a den of rats over there when you cross that border. We had the government following us as soon as we crossed the border into Bolivia, because we were bringing some cameras and some tripods and things of that nature. We didn't even have that much gear. We were trying to fly under the radar, and we had one large duffel bag with gear in it, and it was not easy getting it into the country. One of the first things that you'll find out in Bolivia is they do not want you. They don't even like you taking photos, but they definitely don't want you taking video of anything. They don't want you taking footage of anything. They're very hardcore about it. And so we had eyes on us from the moment we walked across the border in Bolivia. And for people who are not familiar with Bolivia, this was my first visit to Bolivia. I figured that Bolivia and Peru would be very similar. I was wrong. It was like 2 different worlds. Crossing from Peru, which is very friendly to tourists. A major part of the economy is tourism. They love outsiders coming in, especially Americans. You're treated very well. When you cross the border into Bolivia, all of that ends. When you cross the border into Bolivia, you are not wanted. You're tolerated in Bolivia. You're not received with any kind of approval or joy, for sure. I mean, you're tolerated. Your presence is merely tolerated. And it's a very bizarre, surreal situation. It's the best that I can describe it, although I've never been there, is North Korea. I think it's the closest that I'll ever come to being in North Korea, being in Bolivia. That's how bad it was for us. We had eyes on us. We had people following us. We were very uncomfortable the whole time. We felt like we were being listened to and watched the entire time as soon as we crossed that border into Bolivia. So Tiwanaku, the famous area, for those who are familiar with the Ancient Aliens series on, I think it's the History Channel, they do a lot of stuff in Tiwanaku. They make a big deal about Tiwanaku. A lot of guys have gone there and used Tiwanaku, the whole Tiwanaku area, as supporting evidence for their ancient astronauts theory. So we wanted to go there ourselves with a biblical perspective and take a look at it and film and do our own analysis of what we found. And what we found was just as astounding, if not more astounding, than what you see on television. We realized right off the bat that the whole Tiwanaku area is locked down and controlled. It's like a police state when you walk into that place. I mean, all of Bolivia is like a police state, but when you go to Tiwanaku, you are in very unfriendly territory. Just recently, about 5 months ago, they decided to clamp down even tighter in Tiwanaku. They introduced ropes, and they introduced more laws, more regulations for tourists. You're not allowed to even touch the rocks anymore. For example, in Pumapunku, which is a part of Tiwanaku. Now, let me explain this. Tiwanaku, there's a bunch of different ways to say this stuff. You'll hear it pronounced differently, said differently, and written differently on all the different shows that feature it. Even in Bolivia, people say it differently. So it's really confusing. The whole area is called Tiwanaku. When you pull up to it, it's called Tiwanaku. Now, the town there's a town right there, right in the area where all these ruins are. The town is called Tiwanaku. So the town's called Tiwanaku. All the ruins are referred to as Tiwanaku. So it's very confusing. And then within the ruins, there's different areas. There's Pumapunku, which is the most famous area and the most impressive. And then there is the other side, which is often just referred to as Tiwanaku. So it's very confusing, and I didn't know any of this going in because this was never made clear on any of the programs I've seen. And I'd seen all the Ancient Alien stuff and a lot of these guys, the little productions that they've done on their own. Some of these guys that are featured in Ancient Aliens, and it's a very different situation than what you're led to believe on television, at least the impression that you're given. One thing that they definitely never have shown is how oppressive it is. I mean, it is extremely oppressive. The whole Tiwanaku area is oppressive. You just have an oppressive feeling there. Again, you're being watched. You feel like you're hated. They hate you. By the way, Americans have to pay $100 extra just to get into Bolivia because they especially don't like Americans. So they really let you know that when you're there. For example, they told us that.
Tim, yep. Let me interrupt here too, ladies and gentlemen. Even today in Bolivia just signed a deal with Russia for 20 state-of-the-art fighters. The president of Bolivia has no love lost for the Americans, but I need to give a little background to him. What's happened in Bolivia, in the specific area Tim's talking about, is there's a whole new dig that's been found of underground pyramid structures. Now, for Doug, as long as I've been on talk radio, you've heard me enough to know, I've told everybody, it's not what you see above ground. It's what you see underground, or for more importantly, what they won't let you see underground. It's true all over the world. Now, why I brought up the Russia card is this. I was told, I've said this so many times, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but this will explain. Tim, your actual words were, it's like a bunch of Gestapo there. Those were your words. And yep. I think what people need to understand is that they have, from the even 2 years ago, the security and the direction that tourists are even allowed to go has changed dramatically. I call it the inverse liar's lie, okay? That's a new term for you tonight, Doug. The inverse liar's lie. The more of the truth they uncover, the more they have to lie. And in order to protect that, they'll now go to any extreme to make sure you don't see anything you're not supposed to see. You don't film anything you're not supposed to film. And, Tim, I want you to deal with how they actually moved the Temple of the Sun from the older. I think people are. I don't want them to miss this. This is critical. In other words, they have moved it or staged it, placed it on a platform that's a whole different post-flood set of archaeological findings, and the old, because of the relationship to the old, the forbidden zone, if you call it that, in Bolivia, they don't want two and two put together. Now, spell out for people the difference between antediluvian and post-diluvian from how you saw it and how you'll be describing it in the video. Because this video, ladies and gentlemen, we're trusting that anybody who gets a video is going to understand the biblical response, the twisting of secular history, the New World Order's spin on the ancient aliens, and we'll explain later on the show how the Catholic Church, and look, this isn't an anti-Catholic statement, but how everywhere we went, the Catholic Church has been absolutely covering up, taking up, stealing, and doing whatever they have to do to make sure the artifacts of what we're talking to you about tonight do not see the light of day until it's time. So, Tim, explain that, because I thought that was one of the most fascinating things that I've ever heard, because when you see the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, even watch any specials on it, you'd swear, or forgive me, you wouldn't swear, but you would declare that, you know, it's not even accurate, is it, in its juxtaposition of how close it is, i.e. the old architecture versus the new. In other words, the giant fallen angel buildings versus who came afterwards.
That's right. That's exactly right. That was something that really astounded me when I got there. I thought Pumapunku was further away, and it was a completely separate archaeological site, and then what's referred to as Tiwanaku, like on the Ancient Aliens program, they refer to it as Tiwanaku, that is in a different area entirely. Well, when you get there, you realize that's not true. It's literally to walk from the Pumapunku site to what's glibly referred to as Tiwanaku. It's like a 10-minute walk. I mean, it's like, walking, 200 yards or so. and it's all right there. So right when we got there, we thought, well, this is interesting. This is all kind of compact right here. We didn't expect this. And we went over to Pumapunku first because I was more interested in Pumapunku first because it was acknowledged to be and is acknowledged to be by a lot of archaeologists an older construction than, again, what is glibly referred to as Tiwanaku, and that is true, and it's even more true than they can imagine. But the Pumapunku site is the site where, to give people a reference, it's the site where you find the famous H blocks. If you watch the Ancient Aliens, or if you look up on the internet, you type in the H blocks of Pumapunku, you'll get those famous H blocks. That's the Pumapunku site. That is very distinct and separate from the rest of the Tiwanaku area. Now, we right away we discovered some very interesting things about the Pumapunku site. Most of what is there, the grand majority of what is there, is still under the ground at Pumapunku, and it is under the ground. I mean, it's not like there's ruins all over the place on the Pumapunku side. No, it's only where they've excavated, and where they've excavated, everywhere that they dug a hole, they, of course, they dig like these rectangular, very nice, neat excavations. Everywhere where they dug these little rectangular excavations, you see massive monolithic stones jutting out of the ground. And you see more of Pumapunku under the ground. And they've only gone down right there at that site. They've only gone down, I can't remember, maybe 4 feet, 5 feet down into these rectangular concaves in the ground where they're excavating. And the very first thing that I thought when I walked up was, why in the world did they stop? That was the very first thing that came to mind. Why did they stop? A lot of people will go to Pumapunku and will concoct these wild speculative conjectures about aliens and that the H blocks were used for landing pads or a runway for alien craft, and it was an alien base and all. And I mean, it's really laughable. With all due respect to those guys, it's really illogical and laughable when you're actually standing in Pumapunku, because anybody with half a brain is going to recognize immediately that this thing is under the ground. Whatever it is, what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. Whatever was there is under the ground, and for some reason, the Bolivian government does not want to delve further into it. It was just a couple little rectangles pulling up some of the H blocks, and that's it. I mean, that is the first thing that hit us immediately when we walked up there, and I wasn't expecting that. I thought it was going to be a well-excavated area. You would think that, wow, they found this amazing architecture, these unexplainable, megalithic blocks. You'd think that they would delve deeper into it, want to uncover it, and try and figure out what it is. That is not the case at all. They give you a little peek. It's like pulling the corner of the curtain back, giving you just a little peek, and that's it. They don't even let you touch the stones anymore. We did, of course. We distracted the guards, and I mean, But anyway, what we discovered in these constructions, and this is visible, obviously, this is visible in a lot of documentaries that have been made, is the absolute precision that you find in Pumapunku. And I'm getting to the difference between Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, but I want to describe for people the precision at Pumapunku so that when I talk about Tiwanaku, they understand the difference that we illustrate in the documentary. The Pumapunku, for example, the famous H blocks, you see in a lot of the documentaries out there how sharp the right angles that are incorporated in andesite. This is andesite, one of the hardest rocks on Earth, and they somehow they were able to craft these stones, to cut these stones with such precision. I mean, we are talking about exact, perfect right angles that are still, some of them are still in pristine condition to this day, and the the engineer Mario from Puno, from the university that was with us, something he was telling us on the way there was that he also has another theory that they were able to vitrify the surface. Whoever built Pumapunku was able to vitrify the surface of the stone. Well, when we got there, this was evident. I mean, this was clearly evident. There's no doubt about it. The surface of the stones, whatever this structure is, it's probably a whole city under the ground right there, that they were able to vitrify the surfaces of the stones. Absolutely incredible. In other words, when you run your hand over some of the stones that are less weathered, you literally feel like you're running your hand over a glass table. It's vitrified. It's not just cut, it's vitrified. That's a whole nother level of technology. So immediately when you walk up to Pumapunku and you start touching the stones, you recognize that, hey, this is high technology. There's no doubt about it. And that's probably why they don't want you touching the stones anymore, because again, anybody with half a brain is going to realize, wait a minute, we're dealing with something here that is in terms of conventional history impossible. It's an impossibility.
Right. Tim. Yeah, let me interrupt you because this is important. Vitrification can only be achieved, even in antiquity, by intense heat, i.e. by super intense heat. And Doug, I don't know if you and Joe and others have seen the picture in some of the Mayan, Inca, and Aztecs. It almost looks like there's a guy with a backpack and a blowtorch on his back. Have you ever seen those? Well, the reason why this is critical, when Tim is at Tiwanaku and Punapunku, the thing is that within, probably on Thursday of this week, they announced that they have found a level of mercury. Now, this is going to be fascinating, between some of the oldest pyramids in different places in the world, and pyramids in mercury go hand in hand from the standpoint of in the ancient Indian myths, and this is why we're talking about this stuff. You guys out there in listening land, we're equipping you with what I believe will be an amazing revelation to be able to answer the skeptics when they come out with all their nonsense. But what's fascinating, mercury in antiquity, especially 4000 BC, in the Indian Rama Empire, was always associated with flight. That was one of the propellants and the Vimana flying craft. And if everybody thinks this is wacky, the Indian aerospace equivalent of NASA presented thousands of pages of documents to a space symposium, and some people laughed. It was interesting. The ones that knew what they were talking about, and those are all the boys from the three-letter agencies with no clearance, even no known clearance levels that most people would be familiar with, didn't laugh. And so what's fascinating is, just as there are pyramids now, to my knowledge, the presence of mercury, vitrification is what happens when sand is turned to glass in an atomic bomb. So that word vitrify is really important. So like most people, if you were to look at all those stones and you think you run your hands over there, they're going to be coarse, like sandpaper, but that wasn't the case. And now, interestingly enough, Tim, and pun intended on this, as you get back from the Peruvian expedition, editing it to go in, and listen to this, Cam, this will blow your mind. The fact is that within 3 or 4 days, they're announcing publicly the presence of mercury in its refined form, not just, cinnabar or something that's refined into mercury, but mercury in its refined form, and it's always located in areas where history states, ancient history, call it legend, call it myth, that there was a huge, if you will, post-flood atomic war and pre-flood atomic war. Mm-hmm. So when Tim said, is it fair to say that was probably one of the most unusual things that you came away from just in touching that stone that you've never heard before, that's never been discussed before, and it's as relevant as a revelation now of all these finds are coming to the forefront. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I've heard people talk about that they're incredibly smooth, and I don't know if some of the explorers and researchers have specifically mentioned the vitrification, but
I don't believe they have.
Mario, again, the engineer, the Peruvian engineer from the university in Puno, he believes he has proof that they were able to melt the surface of the rocks or add some kind of a mineral layer or sand maybe and melt that on top. And he shows in the video, he points out what he believes is evidence where the surface has been rubbed off. In other words, it's a layer. And by the way, we found this kind of construction also in Sardinia, except in Sardinia they were using layers of quartz. So this idea of either vitrifying the surface or crystallizing the surface seems to be an antediluvian technology that was ubiquitous. It was universal. People knew there was some reason they did this. Obviously, it's aesthetically pleasing, but I'm sure that it also had some kind of a technical purpose as well. So I know we're coming up on the break here. When we get to the other side of the break here, I'll describe now what's on the other side, what I consider to be the post-flood construction, and what's going on there with what Steve mentioned in terms of the moving around of the artifacts.
Just fascinating. Yeah. Well, before you go any further, I just want to mention that in Steve Quayle's book Genesis 6 Giants, Steve, you go into the first nuclear age where you talk about vitrified sand and and as you mentioned before, the ancient Indian flying machines. But what really got me interested here is this vitrified sand superheated very quickly, forming a green glass and such. Tim, this is what you're referring to, right? Just to be clear, that could very well have been. You're talking about superheated.
Technologies
superheated?
Could we not be talking about a nuclear weapon of sorts or nuclear energy of sorts?
Well, yeah. They like Steve said, they had to have used an extremely intense energy source that would produce extremely intense heat. That's the only way you can vitrify, especially if you're talking about the surface of rock andesite.
Okay, yeah, that's. I just want to make sure that I was on the right page. So, obviously, folks, there's a lot here.
Absolutely amazing. We're talking with Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and Tim Alberino, the Alberino Analysis by Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com, and Tim Alberino of the Alberino Analysis, talking about his recent trip to South America and with particular focus on Peru. And we were talking in the first hour of some of the discoveries he made, some of the encounters that he had, and the oppressiveness, especially, you said, Tim, the government oppressiveness when you and your team entered into Bolivia. I mean, that's fascinating and dangerous stuff. I know what you seek to find is what, and uncovering and unearthing this information and these truths for the Lord are what drives you to do this. But you ever find yourself scared or having to just pray to the Lord and say, I'm in over my head, Lord. You got to get me out of here.
Yeah, the whole time we were in Bolivia, we were pretty nervous. All three of us were pretty nervous in Bolivia because last thing we wanted was to end up in a Bolivian slammer. So it was touch and go, to say the least, at certain parts of that of the Bolivia part of our expedition.
Man,
I want to throw something in. Hey, Doug, I want to let everybody know too that Pastor Bruce York's entire congregation and Susan, his wife, were praying for their protection. I remember asking Romy and being on the phone with Romy, praying for their protection, covering them, and asking God to block them. Here's what I think people have got to understand, and boy, Lord, help me to communicate this. I can tell you from personal experience that this is the most secret stuff in the world. How can you say that, Steve? Simple. When I get contacted with guys that have 4 stars and more, and basically, how do I say this? I got to leave it at that, or I'll say too much. I'm not trying to be mysterious, okay? And I get contacted by guys who show up at my store with cosmic clearance. If you don't know what that is, top secret's 28 levels below that. the point that is really critical, or when I talk to a man who was handpicked by Dr. Teller, God bless you, my brother, and I won't even say his name or initials, and he basically has been dealing with core reality. Here's what core reality boils down to in a nutshell. True ancient history, stargates, and aliens, and guess what? You can't separate them all. Probably the closest guy that ever came to really nailing that in a film, and I'd say accurately, was Chris Carter in the X-Files movie, not the X-Files series. Some of that stuff's real too. So why am I saying this? And I believe this is why God spoke to a couple, a dear couple, that, and I mean, they could have taken their money and gone any place with it. But when they called me, actually sent me an email and said, God laid this on our heart. Here's why God wants this stuff known. There's nothing that has been hidden that will not be revealed. The reason why the slaughter of Christians and the necessary removal of them all in the United States is so that they can bring on the ultimate deception. Doug, here's a simple question for you in your investigator days. Who is it that stands against right now the revelation of that we were not created by God, that Jesus is not the Son of God? Now, that's what they're saying. I obviously don't believe that. And the fact is that the aliens created us. They're coming back to save us and to serve mankind. Unfortunately, they're going to be serving us up on a banquet table, and they're going to be, most likely turning us into a food source. Well, the answer always goes back. If I said that to you immediately, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, Doug?
Well, Luciferians, anyone with an anti-biblical agenda. I mean, Satan,
there you go.
Satan, the list is growing daily, it seems.
Yeah, and so this is what, boy, I'll tell you what, and this is what Tim even encountered in Sardinia. Tim, I want you to share just who it was, because even in Peru, is it accurate to say that when you asked who was covering it up, the answer in the Reed Islands on Lake Titicaca were the same as the elderly people in Sardinia? It goes right back to the Vatican, does it not?
Well, in Cusco, when we talked to the people in Cusco,
yeah, Cusco. I'm sorry.
We were also in Cusco concerning some of the amazing sites around Cusco. When we found out, we literally found out. It wasn't even just asking people. We went and found out ourselves that the Vatican. I mean, I call Cusco now the Vatican of Peru. I mean, or I should say the Vatican of South America, because that's what it is. When you're there, you realize, wow. We are, this is a Catholic, this is a Vatican stronghold. And that's another thing that you don't hear anybody saying, but you're hearing it from me tonight. Cusco is a Vatican stronghold, precisely because of what it's sitting on top of.
And I think that, just so you know, Doug, I was with Tom. Yeah, I don't know if somebody cut out, but when I was with Tom Horn over the weekend, Tom told me an amazing story. When they were leaving Mount Graham, they stopped in. That's in Arizona. This is related to what Tim is talking about right now. When they were leaving, they stopped at a little, I think, a restaurant, and the guy came out, and they were talking about Mount Graham. He says, well, did they tell you that the Pope came here in a quiet delegation in a helicopter to go and take a look at what's coming through their telescopes? Now, Tom hasn't said that publicly. He'll probably say that on your show on May 5th. For those, I don't know if you've announced that yet, but Chris Putnam, who, by the way, I met, and Chris is, a classic sense of the word, a scholar, because he's reading his Hebrew right to left. He's got his Greek lexicon up there, and he's a very, very, very competent linguist. But saying all that, it just dawned on me, okay? When Tim touched down in Sardinia, they were followed by the guy. The Sardinians, I'm going to make this short, Tim, and turn right back to you. The Sardinians made it clear, almost scared to death in the case of a certain individual you met with, a couple individuals. You go to Cusco, that same thing is there and present. Now, saying all that, Tom says that the gentleman said, yeah, the Pope showed up. That was never announced publicly. It was never even intimated publicly, yet it happened. So, okay, someone said, well, I don't believe it unless it's in the newspapers. Well, I got to tell you something. You're already brain dead if you believe that anybody who is doing anything surreptitiously is going to publish it or ever tell the truth. So take it from there, Tim. Exactly. Just the whole, what we're dealing on now is the cover-up. Remember I said this is the core reality. Share from Sardinia the following and the fear, and then take it to Cusco.
Okay. Let me finish up the difference between Puma Punku and Tiwanaku for people who
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I forgot about that.
So to return to that, to the whole Puma Punku situation, just so that to close that out, so people understand how the situation is there. Basically, as I said about Puma Punku, everything at Puma Punku is under the ground. There's no doubt about it. It's under the ground. All that they're showing is the tip of the iceberg, and they're not, at least on the surface, interested in going any deeper, although I'm sure all kinds of stuff is going on the ground. But if you walk 200 yards or so from Puma Punku across the way, you're in the area now that is referred to generally as Tiwanaku. Over in that area, there's a distinction. Everything you find at Tiwanaku, most of what you find at Tiwanaku is above ground and is inferior to Puma Punku. And that is evident immediately. Tiwanaku is inferior in terms of the technology employed to build it. It is a typical sort of post-flood construction with big blocks, but not the same kind of precision you find over Puma Punku. And it looks like whoever built Tiwanaku was trying to copy or emulate what was done in Puma Punku. So this is something that has been pointed out, even on Ancient Aliens and different programs, that Puma Punku is obviously older and obviously employed more advanced technology than Tiwanaku. However, what I found out is that the government of Bolivia has only one sanctioned narrative on the whole area. And all the guides have to say the same thing, and they're very, very aggressive about forcing their narrative on everybody. And this is something that you don't know unless you go there. And that narrative is that Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, there's really no difference. There's nothing to see here. This is the same kind of a deal, same kind of a civilization. Maybe Puma Punku is a little older, same kind of technology. There's nothing to see here. Don't, ask any questions. That's the attitude, and it's very aggressively enforced. And so, in fact, when you're over in the Tiwanaku side, that's newer, that is, in my opinion, post-flood, and then the Puma Punku side is pre-flood. The Tiwanaku side, you actually find blocks of andesite, because the Tiwanaku side is almost exclusively sandstone. You find blocks of andesite that were obviously brought over from Puma Punku, carried over and strategically placed on top of rocks, and right like on the corner of a walkway, right where the tourists would notice them. And furthermore, when you go up into the temple of Kalasasaya over there, which is, people just refer to it as Tiwanaku, the temple of Tiwanaku, that's where the so-called Gate of the Sun is located, is up in that temple. But first of all, the government did a big restoration over there, and they won't tell you that. We found that out while we were there. They did a restoration, but they don't want anybody to know for some reason. They rebuilt a lot of Tiwanaku. Now, isn't this interesting? They rebuilt a lot of Tiwanaku. They're excavating a lot of Tiwanaku. That's where most of the excavation is. That's where they're trying to push all the tourists over to that side. They leave the more astounding situation, Puma Punku, under the ground, but they go excavating everything that is post-flood and trying to make you think that it's the same thing. In fact, the Gate of the Sun is the famous Gate of the Sun over in Tiwanaku is basically wrought from one gigantic block of andesite, one solid block of andesite. This thing is cut out of andesite, which again is extremely hard, and it belongs over in Puma Punku. Not many people know this, and I've never heard anybody acknowledge this. And to these guys' credit that go over there and shoot these videos, I guarantee they got to pull permits, and I guarantee you that they've got officials that are standing there and making sure that what they say, basically are there to make sure they don't say certain things. So I don't know if this is something that's been overlooked, if people haven't noticed this, or if they've had to keep quiet about it, but it is obvious that artifacts from Pumapunku have been carried over and placed in Tiahuanaco, strategically placed over there. And the guides, if you listen to the guides walking around, for example, there's a famous monolith made out of solid andesite right in the middle of the Kalasasaya temple in Tiahuanaco, and that this monolith, all the guides, it's comical, all the guides have to say when they walk up to this monolith, I stood there and listened to them, this is an original monolith. This was here originally. This is exactly how it was discovered. This is exactly where it was. They all said that when they came. I'm thinking, how bizarre that they all have to say that when they come up to this monolith that is made of andesite that obviously belongs in Pumapunku. Why do I say that? Because there are other monoliths in Tiahuanaco that are imitations of the andesite ones, and they're made out of sandstone, which is much softer and much easier to work with, and the technology is far inferior to what's over at Pumapunku. Furthermore, our engineer Mario told us that he knows for a fact that these artifacts, namely the andesite artifacts from Pumapunku, the monoliths, the blocks, and the Gate of the Sun, were brought over, and I think he even mentioned the year, sometime way back in the 60s or something, right when people were just beginning to get interested in the site. They were brought over and strategically placed and positioned in Tiahuanaco. So here's the question. Why the deception? Why? I think we know the answer, but why the deception? Why go to such great lengths to move these massive andesite artifacts that weigh hundreds of tons, place them over where they don't belong, and then make all the guides say that these are original, these were here? Why? Obviously, there's a cover-up. There's a reason. One can only assume that it's because they don't really want you to think about what's under the ground. They want you to concentrate on what's above the ground. And
that's
that
like tampering
is the sense
crime
that we got.
I mean,
exactly.
Tim, I'll tell you something. You can, and Steve, when we were called out to do blood stain pattern analysis, it would be very easy to see when a crime scene. Well, not easy, but you have to know what you're looking for a crime scene to be tampered with. But there's always a very it's a very serious underlying reason, because when you do that, Tim and Steve, the stakes are extremely high. So please, ladies and gentlemen, listen to what Mr. Alberino is saying.
And the misdirection aspect too. You mentioned the ancient astronaut theorists and their TV shows and all the quote unquote evidence they unearth and claim to unearth. Well, why wouldn't this be something that would also be
exactly?
And it's the misdirection.
Exactly. And you know what, Joe? These guys actually say, they make the claim, some of them, not all of them. I've heard the claim made that the Gate of the Sun over in Tiahuanaco, in the temple there, in Kalasasaya over there, is a gateway that when you go through it, it takes you to Pumapunku. And standing there, I thought, that's just ridiculous. I mean, it's just a ridiculous concoction. Listen, here's the deal. These guys reject the biblical narrative that is true and logical, and the story is there. They reject it, so the only way they can put the pieces together is to concoct wild, speculative crap about everything that they're looking at. They reject the truth, so they have to put these pieces together, and it is evident. I'm telling you, the magic of television basically. It works for them. They can get away with it. But when you're actually standing in front of the Gate of the Sun, looking at this thing, what's in your mind, if you have a proper perspective on the ancient world, is this does not belong here, but they want you to think that it does. In fact, we were noticing this, and our team, the three of us, were discussing this, and obviously out loud, we were kind of whispering about it, and some of the other tourists were kind of coming up and listening to what we were saying and kind of were intrigued, and we started to feel like, we better get out of here pretty soon, because that's when we started really getting yelled at over there and correct and not what do you call it? They've got over at the ruins now. I think probably because of all the attention that's been put on Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, they've got I refer to them as ruin Nazis. They walk around with these bullhorns and they have these phones in their pockets, and if you get too close to something, or you step on something, or you're asking certain kind of questions, or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing over there as a tourist, what they expect you to be doing, which is just be brainless and go, oh wow, this is interesting, and just accept their narrative. They're on you like a hawk over there. They bullhorn you, they yell at you, they pull out their phone and take pictures of you. And they were getting extremely agitated. And I'm convinced, and I think so are the other two guys that were on our team, I'm convinced that they had people there that could understand English, so that they could understand what you're saying about the artifacts. So, to report you if you're starting to say things that they don't like. And so we got bullhorned a lot, and we're being followed. And there were all kind of tourists there. It wasn't packed, but there were handfuls of tourists here and there. But those guys were honed in on us, and so we were kind of getting nervous out there, and we decided to call it quits after a certain point. But the point is that there's an obvious cover-up going on over there, and they've obviously moved artifacts. And this wasn't done recently. This was done years and years and years ago. They obviously have not delved any deeper, at least on the surface, into the more interesting part of Tiwanaku, which is Pumapunku. And they're obviously trying to channel everybody and all the intrigue and all the questions about the area. They're trying to keep them based on what's on the surface and what they're uncovering. They're excavating a couple more pyramids out there, but they won't talk about the one that they're excavating under the ground. I realized that they were only talking about the one that they were excavating above the ground. And the ones that they're excavating above the ground, I'm fairly convinced that those are all post-flood constructions. Now, here's the thing. When you're standing in Tiwanaku, you're standing in a massive valley that is bordered by mountains. You're in the Andes. You're 13,000 feet above sea level, and you're in a plain. And basically, you're in a very wide, broad plain. And the sense that I got, and in fact, our whole team had, was that in truth, if you were to dig down anywhere in that plain, you would hit the kind of artifacts that are found at Pumapunku. I got the sense that the whole thing is some kind of gigantic city. With pyramids and everything, and that what you see in Pumapunku is the top of a structure. It's just like I keep saying, the tip of the iceberg. I think that there is an underground antediluvian city underneath the dirt there. And by the way, how did it get covered up? It's almost universally agreed that a flood brought in sediment and washed over all of the Pumapunku older ruins. That it had to be a flood. It brought in all of this extra dirt and sediment and deposited it in that valley. Of course, it was the flood of Noah. That is the most logical inference that anyone can make. It was the great flood. It deposited all of that sediment there. People will say, it was Lake Titicaca flooded. But listen, to flood that whole valley that we were in fact, to flood the whole Altiplano, it has to be massive amounts of water to flood that whole area, and it is obvious that the entire area was flooded. So what is the best, most logical, and easiest, and most natural explanation? There was an antediluvian society living there in the whole Altiplano. There were giants. There was high technology, fallen angel activity, a very large advanced civilization that was decimated in the Great Flood of Noah, probably decimated before the Great Flood of Noah in a great battle between the giants, as the Book of Enoch talks about, and then completely washed over by the Flood of Noah. And that was, by the way, part of the purpose of the Flood of Noah was to bury this stuff. It was intentional on God's part to bury this stuff, to bury the technology, to bury the knowledge of the watchers, of the fallen angels. And that's precisely what we find. If you go out there and concoct stuff about aliens and this and that, I mean, it really is ridiculous. And, I mean, you're standing on evidence for the biblical narrative, and that's why we went, for the audience. That's why we went. We're coming with the biblical perspective. We understand what ancient history truly looked like, the technology, the fallen angels, the giants, and everywhere we go, we find confirmation of it.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. Steve.
Well, yeah, and Doug, I think the thing that's relevant, bringing it back, this is the time that these things will be revealed. This is a time that it's critical for people to understand that it doesn't matter what country you're in. There comes a point, I don't know, they can put all the Nazis in the world on the border, but when God says enough is enough, it's just like all of the volcanoes going off, all of the flying saucers going off. It's like the technology of the ancients is coming into the foreground. And again, we're now seeing an acceleration unlike any time in the history of the world, because it's the time. Pastor David Langford did that study on a specific time and general time. There's a Kairos and then there's a Chronos. So the point being is that this is the time for this stuff in South America to be revealed. Now, Tim, I want you to share, and again, if people want to start sending in their questions, I want you to share just how cool this was, that God gave you a platform, and we can go back and jump around and stuff, but we found out that share with the people that how, and I said before, I don't know if you were on the radio or I said to it, Doug, when we weren't both on, Tim, but I thought it was interesting how a certain archaeologist was supposed to take you to what you guys were told was, basically up in the mountains of the cloud forest to see the giant bones, and how basically by the time he gets from Lima to where you're at and wherever you were at the time, he kind of pulls the, I don't know anything thing. Share with the people how that came down, what you were told before, what you were told when you get there, because, again, you don't know how powerful the most powerful people in the world are until they threaten you and or your family, or, basically friends you've known and scholars you've worked alongside of disappear. So share that, and then if you would go into the whole thing about how the Lord opened the door for you to address the University of Lima or whatever.
Yeah, well, we were told that a very famous guy in Peru, very famous, a prominent archaeologist, was going to meet with us and basically show us where the giant bones are hidden. And obviously we're very excited about that, but the whole thing fell through, and the guy claimed that he didn't know anything about it when we actually met with him. So we're not 100% sure what happened, if we were just being deceived, if they were trying to get something out of us, but it was a very bizarre kind of a situation, obviously disappointing for us, but we documented so much. That was at the end of our trip. We had already documented so much amazing stuff up until that point that it really didn't matter that much, because we just kind of switched gears. I was invited to speak at the University of San Martin in the city of Tarapoto in the high jungle of the Amazon basin in Peru, and we went and we did that, and it was basically a little conference that they put together in the university. And I presented the biblical viewpoint, the biblical narrative, the Genesis 6 narrative, and because part of what we're doing as Gen 6 Productions is not only are we exploring, not only are we investigating, but we're also educating. And so they had never heard the biblical narrative the way that I presented it there in the university. I did a little presentation, which is in the documentary, and they had never heard the biblical narrative in terms of giants and fallen angels and technology and the pre-flood world, and this was new to them. Now, interestingly enough, everybody knew about the ancient aliens. Everybody knew about, the Anunnaki, but the biblical narrative was never presented. I mean, think about that. And in Peru, there are thousands and thousands of evangelical churches, and yet nobody has an answer. None of these churches have ever given a biblical answer for all this stuff that's lying all over the place in Peru. So the narrative in Peru is the Anunnaki, the ancient aliens. It's incredible. Even the archaeologists. This is a funny this is a funny little fact that I found out over there. We would meet with archaeologists, very well-respected archaeologists, and I would ask them, what do the, they would always tell us, well, the conventional historical perspective. That's what they would always tell me when I say, what about Pumapunku? What about Sacsayhuaman? What about Ollantaytambo? How is it possible that the ancients, without the benefit of the wheel, were able to move and were able to quarry and move and craft these gigantic megalithic stones and set them into place? I mean, how do you explain this? And the archaeologists would always tell me, well, ropes and thousands of men and hundreds of years. You want to know how they explain anything on this planet? Ropes? No, here, I'll tell you right now. Logs, ropes, thousands of men, and hundreds of years. They will explain anything with that formula. I'm telling you, anything. Logs, ropes, thousands of men, and hundreds of years. There. That's how they did it. That's what they tell you everywhere. It's a joke. And you know what? I found out that they know it's a joke, because when I press them further and I say, wait a minute, you know that that's impossible, they concede. All the professionals I talk to, they concede. And then I push them further. So what's the answer? And what do you think they say? The aliens did it. And I'm talking about the professionals. The aliens did it. I mean, they won't say that in their books. They won't say that on television, but in private, when you really get them, corner them, you say, this is illogical. This can't be done. You know better as a professional. You're right. The best explanation we have is aliens. So that's what you find when you press these guys. And one of the guys that I talked to is a famous archaeologist he's set to be giving a talk in Washington D.C. next month. So the guy's big time. And that was the explanation, again, when you corner them, aliens. So obviously there's a need for what we're doing. I mean, the biblical narrative puts all the pieces together. It does. It makes sense. It's logical. It's scientifically logical. It works. The models work. The flood, the antediluvian world, it answers everything, and that is precisely why they don't want anybody to know about it. That is precisely why the sons of Seth theory is so dangerous, and why a rejection of the narrative of Genesis 6 is so detrimental, because the rejection of the truth, even if people say, and people often say this to me, well, who cares? What does it really matter, if people know about the giants and the fallen angels and the technology and the ancient civilizations? What does it really matter? It doesn't have any bearing on the gospel. It doesn't have any bearing on Christianity. Who cares? Well, now we're seeing why it matters, because people are being deceived. And when the church doesn't give an answer, the aliens did it. That becomes the narrative, because a lot of believers, this is sort of a subject that they don't even know what to deal with, because they cannot conceive of an ancient world that was in possession of high technology under the tutorship and of fallen angels, using this forbidden knowledge and the giants and all this kind of stuff. That is true. That is the fact of history. That's what's being covered up. And it has been carefully, it is being, in our day right now, it is carefully being covered up and switched out with the lie of the ancient aliens and the Anunnaki and so forth. So it was a privilege for us to go down and speak to the university. It was the first time they ever heard anything like this, and I thank God that as Gen 6 Productions that we have the opportunity to do that, because that's the most fulfilling thing for us. And I know I speak for Steve when I say that, when we carry this message, we're not just carrying the message of Genesis 6, we're carrying the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it confirms and affirms the Bible. The whole story, the whole counsel of Scripture is confirmed when you start in the book of Genesis and you work your way all the way up to Revelations. Everything fits together, everything. And so again, it was a real privilege for us to be able to do that at conference.
Doug?
Yeah, well, I just that's what this is all about. I got a question earlier today. with all of the things happening in the world today, why this subject? And this subject, and I think Tim just so eloquently explained why, because the deception that we're going to be facing, and we are facing, is going to, the roots of the deception, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but the roots of deception will be and are in Genesis, the very aspect of the Bible, because Tim is verifying the authenticity, the legitimacy of the literal interpretation of the Bible. So,
and it's like, Doug, that question presupposes that a person has no clue between cause and effect. I'm not trying to be unkind or anything in that statement. The problem with Christendom is they have only dealt with the fruit of evil and not the root of evil. The riots going on tonight, all the events taking place across the country, this is all being orchestrated for a purpose. The purpose is the ultimate destruction of the human race. You want to argue with anybody? Argue with Jesus. The point is, he said, if these days, weren't short, and there'd be no flesh left alive. It's like the question I get, well, why do you want to talk about genetic engineering or singularity, or, they slaughter those words, but transhumanism? That's not relevant. Oh, yes, it is. You're an albatross, ma'am, and I'm speaking, generally now, or sir, you don't get it. You think because you're 75, maybe 80, or even 65 going on 100, the point, that's an attitude thing. The thing is that you can't, another attempted humor. The bottom line is that it won't, if it doesn't affect them, why should they care? It's that attitude that has brought your children, ladies and gentlemen, to a ruined nation. It is that attitude that instead of the highway to heaven, it's literally taking them the highway to hell. It's funny. Do you know who's telling the truth about this stuff to one extent or another? And I don't play the video games, but every day I get Call of Duty, the only one. And Tim and I have talked about this and just mutually scratched our own head going, do not people see this? They turn little Johnny or little Billy or little Susie or little Janie or Annie loose. And I'm not talking about maybe the listeners of this show, but the world at large. When you spend $500 million on a video game, do you think if Satan is the prince and power of the air, and do you think if he's providing the impetus, the direction, the supernatural wisdom, do you think that you didn't care enough when your kids were taken away by the music of the day? Now you don't care enough when your kids are being taken away by the video games of the day? The only ones are the ones, actually it's funny, the only people dealing with truth is being presented in a virtual environment through video games, and the people who could deal with truth based on the Word of God are basically too set in their ways to think any of this stuff is relevant. You cannot understand the fruit of evil until you deal with the root of evil. For instance, this whole situation now, does it take anybody's thought process to go beyond that someone killed, as usual, a poor and in this case, a black man that had done nothing, and now there's rioting, and now you've got the Crips and the Bloods, two gangs, which, by the way, have been secretly funded in some dimension or another, either known to them or unknown to them, and the Nation of Islam coming together. Hello, can anybody see that? And then if you've got the Mexican drug cartels joining with ISIL, whatever, hello, can you see that? Here's the thing. These entities that set this ball in motion are soon to be released to carry it to their, what they believe is logical conclusion. That's war with God and war against God's people. I'd say, Doug, that's a pretty important issue. And this is what I want to make this clear. Gen 6 Productions, if you were to say, how are you going to spend, Steve, the last hours, weeks, months, years, whatever God gives me, is going to be to put it into a logical and sequential way. I told Tom Horn, and Tim, I hadn't had a chance to tell you this, but I said, we have to find somebody that can set up a curriculum, a biblical-based curriculum that can be, made available to everybody, and so that they can understand systematically the origin of spiritual warfare. Now, I want to put out one more time, probably for the 100th time, for those of you that really want to get it and get it right and quickly, I would urge you to go on DerekPrince.org, DerekPrince.org, and order the Spiritual Conflict series. When anybody asks me, what gave you your start, Steve, in this whole area, it was that. For once, instantly, I think it was a mercy of God in my calling, but the point being, he lays it out so consistently, so linearly. Derek Prince was a Hebrew, Greek, Latin scholar, trained in Oxford, filled with the Holy Ghost, very, very systematic, a wonderful man of God. And there are many people listening to this broadcast tonight who, like me, came out of the Jesus movement, and God used him to train a bunch of long-haired social outcasts and people that, mainstream church would not like to have sitting next to them in a pew, and God did the inevitable, and that's what he's going to do too. I hear all these stories. I was asked it the other day, don't you believe there's going to be a mighty revival? It won't happen between four walls in a building with a church, a steeple, and all the people. It's going to happen on the streets. It's going to happen in your homes. It's going to happen wherever the power of God manifests. And so, Doug, when you get the emails, I get the emails. And by the way, when I get emails, they're from people saying, thank you for explaining all these ancient artifacts. Do you think if 90% of reality TV is basically pushing the alien agenda, if everything Tom Horn and Chris Putnam have written about in Exo Vaticana, in The Road to the Immortals, by the way, that's an amazing book, the point being is that, do you think this is not relevant? And, oh, by the way, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam did say that former Pope was going to resign. Oh, gee, they just must have had a lucky guess. Here's the deal. Quit fighting so hard and say, Lord, teach me. I tell people, take everything Tim Alberino, says to the Lord, take everything I say to the Lord, and I believe people are going to be blown away, because the documentary, when it goes into editing, it's not like on talk radio, This thing is going to be fast-moving. It's going to be incredibly informative, and by the grace of God, it's going to be true to the Word of God. I don't think, Tim, people really understand what the Lord did for you by opening up a university to the science department and the graduate students and those who attended the symposium. And hear me, ladies and gentlemen, that's the first time, according to them, they've ever heard the gospel. I told our benefactors, I said, Cam and Jan, I said, thank you guys for being obedient to the Holy Ghost, because he said to me, this is one of the guys that donated to this project. It would have never come off had it not happened. And the point being is that he wanted to make a difference in the closing time period of whether we've got days or months, whatever. But it's no longer the end is near, the end is here. So who knows? I've got people in the Outback emailing me today. Thank you for dealing with these questions. By the way, it explains a lot of Australian myths and legends too, what we're talking about. So I would encourage everybody, listen, the time is here now. If you pray about it. Those of you that really want to get involved in something, you can't go because of your age, and you want to stand with us in this, we're going to absolutely try and get 6 different episodes, and we won't tell where we're off to next. Probably the next time you won't hear about it. You'll start seeing as soon as we can get them edited and into post-production, everything. You're going to see some amazing stuff. And Tim, just for instance, give people an understanding of Sacsayhuamán and Ojanto Tambo. Just those are amazing things. That how the rocks had to literally be poured into each other to fit. Share them on that.
I would say that out of everything that I saw on this expedition, the most impressive was Sacsayhuamán. Sacsayhuamán is an ancient fortress located right outside of Cusco. It's literally sitting up, basically on the mountainside or up on the plateau, overlooking Cusco, and obviously Cusco was strategically settled by the Inca where it is, not because the Inca thought that was a good place, that was appropriate for defense of their capital city, or because of the natural resources. It is apparent to me that they settled right on top of whatever antediluvian society, whatever antediluvian culture used to be there, and they literally built their city on top of what they found. You won't hear that if you go there. You won't hear anybody talk about that. Everybody in Cusco, because it's the pride of Peru, Cusco is the pride of Peru, is everybody will tell you it's all Inca. The Inca did everything. It is a lie, and again, if you corner these guys, these guides, and if you corner the archaeologists, and if you corner the engineers, they will tell you in private, you're right, it couldn't have been the Inca. That they will concede in private that there's no way it could have been the Inca, that the Inca did in fact build on top. So I'm saying that because Sacsayhuaman is a really good example of that fact, and we document it. And Sacsayhuaman, for people who aren't familiar with it, is in terms of megalithic structures, aside maybe from what was discovered recently way out in Siberia, I think it was in Siberia and Russia, the humongous stones out there, Sacsayhuaman is the most impressive megalithic site that I've ever seen, definitely that I've ever seen personally, but even that I'm aware of, perhaps maybe aside from Baalbek, but I think it's at least on the same level. The stones that are incorporated in the walls of Sacsayhuaman are so incredibly massive, and they're fitted together so precisely that you can't slip a piece of paper or blade between a lot of the fittings, or at least the way that they used to be. A lot of them are still in their original configuration, the ones that haven't been shaken out of place. And it is literally, and I think I say this in the documentary, it is inconceivable to the human mind how that can be done. That's my stance. When I stand in front of the Sacsayhuaman, I don't think about logs and ropes and thousands of men and hundreds of years. I concede to the reality that this is inconceivable to the human mind. This technology is greater. This knowledge came from somewhere else. And it didn't come from the Anunnaki. It came from the fallen angels. And the when you're standing there in front of that wall, and Sacsayhuaman is, again, it's the remains of an old fortress, pre-flood, I believe, pre-flood fortress. When you're standing in front of that wall, I mean, you literally feel like you're staring at, you're staring and you're touching something that was built in the days before the flood, possibly, in the times when Adam was still alive, definitely Enoch, and you're touching these stones and you're looking at it, and it really brings the story of the Bible to life. The story, unfortunately, as we were saying, that so many Christians reject out of hand or ignore. That story becomes living. It's alive in front of you. And I was just standing there imagining what this thing would have looked like. Only the bottom level, basically the two bottom levels are left intact, and the walls have been the smaller stones, because it goes from big, huge stones and gradually gets smaller. The smaller stones in Sacsayhuaman and in all of the ruins around Cusco were taken by the Spanish, the ones that they could manage. They took and they built their churches and they built their homes in Cusco after they conquered the Inca. And so what's left are the stones that they couldn't deal with. And it was Pizarro's brother, when he arrived at Sacsayhuaman, him and the general consensus of the conquistadores, and this is a matter of history, we're going to put this in documentary, is when they saw Sacsayhuaman, what was their reaction? Their reaction was the same as my reaction. It was, there's no way that these natives built this. There's no way. They did not build this. And they even made the comment that it appears to have been built by giants. It appears to have been built by giants. If there's anything on this planet that appears to have been built by giants, it's Sacsayhuaman outside of Cusco. And furthermore, if you go down into the city of Cusco, right in the city, if you're walking just around the back alleys of Cusco, you see the same construction. And what happened was the Inca, they found the ruins of this antediluvian culture. They probably thought it was a sacred place. Of course, we know, those of us who are students of history, true history, understand that the post-flood generations, beginning with Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, all the way to contemporary times, that the post-flood indigenous peoples always tried to emulate, and they always adored the pre-flood civilizations that were the legendary, the civilizations of the gods. I call it the empire of the gods. You find this in every culture. So what they do, what I found, Sardinia, Peru, everywhere I go, I find the same thing. Post-flood cultures are building on top of the remains of the pre-flood cultures. I'm sure that they believe that there are significant places of spiritual power and blessing from the gods and so forth, and so they build on top of them. And not only that, it's advantageous because the foundations of Sacsayhuaman, the foundations of much of what's built in Cusco, we can't duplicate that. We can't build better foundations than the ancients did in the pre-flood world. So it's natural, it's logical that you would build on top of those foundations. That's exactly what the Inca did, and then that's what the Spanish did after the Inca. And when you're walking down the streets of Cusco, and again, we illustrate this in the film, you see what's original, the original constructions that were there, that the Inca built on top of, and the architecture is just mind-blowing. And all of the structures are built on an inclination. The base of the structures are inclined inward, so that in the event of an earthquake, that it gives it more support at the base. And there's always smaller stones placed under the big ones so that the whole structure can shift and move. It's absolutely ingenious, absolutely ingenious. And if you look literally on the other side of the street, you have what the Spaniards, they went and took the pieces of the blocks from Sacsayhuaman, and they brought them down and built their own structures. You look at what they built, they had to use mortar, they didn't fit them together right, and their walls are wavy, and they don't have that inclination. I mean, that right there illustrates, even though the Spaniards had their what do you call them, their arquebuses, or whatever you call them, their firearms and their cannons and their steel, they could not replicate what they had found in Cusco and throughout Peru. They just simply could, even using the same building materials, they couldn't even come close to replicating it. And so it's a joke that when people say, "Oh, the Inca did that," no, they didn't. They built what's on top of it. Period. And by the way, the Inca actually admit to that, according to the Spanish chronicles, actually admit that they didn't build a lot of that stuff, that it was the gods. In fact, while I'm on that topic, Pumapunku was said in Inca legend to have been built by a race of giants that came from the gods, and Pumapunku was built in one day. That's what they say. That's what their legend is. And so basically, what Steve was referring to, that looks like those stones were poured. What it looks like is, it looks like the stones were like balls of Play-Doh or of dough, and they weren't completely what's the word? They weren't really soft. I don't know what the word is here. They were pliable enough to where they could be set one on top of the other, and where they could be pressed down and they would squish in. In other words, if there was a concave between two stones, when you put the third one on top, that third stone would squish down into that concave. And I believe I found evidence for it, because all of the stones, these massive stones, where they're missing, if you look at a line of a wall where these, in my opinion, antediluvian stones are aligned, the wall ends where the stones have fallen apart or been taken out. And if you look behind or to the side of the stones, you find a lip. There's a lip where the rock was overhanging the one below and the one to the side of it. There's a lip. It's not a carved lip. It looks like it was squished, like Play-Doh or dough. That's exactly what it looks like. And that will be apparent in the documentary. And I after going there, I have no doubt that whoever built these constructions was able to somehow manipulate the molecular structure of the stone, and at least make it soft enough to press down one on top of the other. And that's why there's no seams, because it's like taking two balls of dough. Let's say you have 3 balls of dough. You take the 2 balls of dough, you stick them next to each other, like in a in a round form, and then you take the third ball of dough and you stick it on top of those, and you press it all down together. Well, all the seams are going to be filled in. That is what looks like what appears to have happened with these stones, and which obviously, if that's true, we're obviously dealing with a level of technology that far surpasses even what we have today. And I believe we are. I believe it's simple. I believe it's what people call angel tech. It's what the fallen angels taught their children. It's the kind of construction that the pre-flood, not the post-flood, but the pre-flood giants were using, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Hey, speaking of technology, Steve and Tim, let us know when you're ready, and we're going to do this, Steve and Tim, at your leisure. Let us know when you're ready for listener questions. We've got some lining up here.
We are at the break now. We'll come back. We can go to the break. We can come back from the break, and Tim and Steve can hit anything else they want to touch on, and then we can take listener questions, as we do have quite a few for both of you gentlemen. So we'll take that break. Now, folks, you're listening to this Monday edition of the Hagman and Hagman Report with Steve Quayle. His website is stevequayle.com. And Timothy Alberino of the Alberino Analysis. It's been a fantastic first 2 hours. We're talking with Tim about his expedition to Peru. Tim and Steve have teamed up to put together an amazing project that we're just absolutely looking forward to. And we're not the only ones, because many of the questions have to do with, when's this going to be available, what's the cost. People are wanting to know how they can get their hands on this, and we'll have those answers on the other side. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hi, folks. Doug Hagman here for American Survival Wholesale. Doug and Joe Hagman, American Survival Wholesale. I got to tell you, they're our go-to place for anything survival related, long-term food storage. If you're interested in long-term food, which you should be. Look, time is short. Look at the headlines, folks. And let's be responsible, right?
I took the chance this weekend, not only long-term storable food, but healthy organic seeds.
Oh, yeah.
As I have a new place of residence, which actually has grass and a yard, and I was talking with Chance over the weekend, or today, I believe, and we were talking to him about a garden I wanted to start, and he was telling me reminding me about his package of seeds, 30 different variety of seeds for a full acre of planted crops for $49.99, and we were going through and talking about the different crops and how they grow, different techniques and ways to grow them. And if you call AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com or send them an email, I'm sure Chance will sit down and spend the time and talk with you also and explain the best way to grow these seeds.
Absolutely. Folks, whatever you need, they've got. You know what? Time is short. And it's American Survival Wholesale, Christian-owned, veteran-owned company. They've got a fantastic outreach program for Christians and veterans. They do more. They help more people than they'll admit to, or than we can even have time to explain. So we're very picky about who we. It's like Steve Quayle says. God brings people into your life. And he makes better friends for you than you can for yourselves, and that goes for partners and people within the extended family of listeners. I'm going to tell you something. Steve is absolutely 100% correct. So visit AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com for all your survival needs. Take us where you want to go, my friend.
Well, I think we should open it up to questions now, Doug, and then just, you act as moderator, direct it, and go back and forth. Give Tim one, me one, because, again, we want to share with things. I will just share those too. The feedback I'm getting on Genesis 6 Volume 2 is phenomenal, because 60% of it's different and new. And even on when I did a 4-program series with Tom Horn for Skywatch TV. I'll let you know, and I'll post on my website when it's going to be done. But clearing up terminologies of antiquity is really critical. The feedback I've gotten from Genesis 6 Volume 2, number one, there are 165 illustrations, and the whole back part is by Mr. Woods, an ancient historian with no religious quote or unquote spin on anything. He basically is just chronicling all of the emperors of antiquity, collected giants. You know what the number one favorite thing for everybody in antiquity was to either have an army of giants 12 feet tall or more, or to have the bones of some entities which were 80 feet. Now, when you get a book written 100 years ago, it's certainly not a script for a video game, so that's incorporated the last 150 pages of Genesis 6, Volume 2, and I think people will be blessed. That book has gone round the world. It still goes round the world, and it's probably the best, how do I say, it's a shoehorn that helps you to walk with your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel. There's nothing else like it. I'm sorry to say there isn't. And the thing is that what's critical about it is as you begin to see the revelation, and I would say this, that as it was being annotated, revised, and changed dramatically, I was able to clear up a lot of foggy areas when the first was written. The first was written, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago at least, and I honestly don't know. But the point being is that now if people want to, have a way in, it's probably the most interesting subject matter. And as Tim said, it doesn't matter what the scholars say. What did the Mayas, Aztecs, and Incas say? They came into those cities that were built by giants. They never said, "Oh yeah, we hired some, some North American unemployed, Native Americans to go and pull giant boulders with sticks and stones and ropes." That's just crazy stuff. The point being is that true history is so exciting. You want to get kids, and I told Tom Horn this, and he agreed. You want kids to know the truth. You want little Johnny who's dealing with little Billy that just played Call of Duty, and I don't know these names, so if I'm twisting them up, I'm on record. I do not play video games. I see, write-ups on them, essays. So, please consider Genesis 6, Volume 2. It's an absolute important, it is the single most referenced book I've ever written, and I hear from people, sometimes 10 years after they first got it. Even some people were given it as a gift. It sat on the shelf until they hear something in the newspaper. They go and get it, and a lot of people sit down and read that a couple days straight. I don't suggest that, but I'm just saying that's the case. So, Doug, go ahead and direct it's available on my website, stevequayle.com, but go ahead and, issue the question to whoever the question is directed to, and then just go back and forth.
Steve, real fast, an easy one from you, from Diana. She asked if you could repeat the name of the Derek Prince series you were referring.
Yes, Spiritual Conflict. Absolutely changed. Yep, absolutely changed my life, Joe.
And I'll second that. Fantastic series. Steve, this is for you from James M. Okay, please ask Steve how CERN might compare to for example, the ancient Tower of Babel, and its implications for us today, and when these implications might become most obvious relative to everything we're talking about.
Well, first of all, I think you're seeing it. Maybe I hope the listener heard CERN. I have an excellent a series on CERN by Michael, an amazing researcher. And just to bring it to the point, Shiva, I believe CERN is the equivalent of the Tower of Babel in the fact that all the world's leading preeminent scientists who deal in particle physics, quantum physics, and all the different disciplines of science have come together. They're so concerned about their findings, they even had to set up a way to email one another and make it NSA-proof. Whether that's the case or not, I can't say. But CERN is already, to me, God put his fingerprint and disapproval on the fact that the issue of Kathmandu, the major 7.8 earthquake, I also believe it was bigger than that, but they're just downgrading it. There's a reason they downgrade it. But I believe that when the temple of Shiva was destroyed, I think that that's what people have got to understand. Doug, they're not using a lion and a lamb as, let's say, the lion will lay down the lamb with the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. They're using as their symbolism the destroyer Shiva, what's called the cosmic dance of creation, where this Hindu deity destroys the world only to make it new. Gee, doesn't that sound like down with the old, out with the old, in with the new, the phoenix rising from its ashes? So I'm saying this. I believe the Kathmandu earthquake and Nepal, the Himalayas, I believe that was the first definable event specifically linked to CERN. They're not using it to find the God particle. They're using it to try and basically come up with a weapon to literally fight against God. And listen, if people don't get this, I'll make it simple. All the ancient technology that failed in the past will not deliver them in their war in the future against the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. That's in a nutshell. Go ahead, Doug, and give Tim one.
Yeah, amen, brother.
Question for Tim. This from Dana. Signs in the heavens are not aliens, nothing but demons who will deceive mankind.
That's a loaded question. My answer to that would be yes and no. I think that aliens, that's a very broad term, are demonic in nature. I don't believe there's any good, quote-unquote, extraterrestrial or alien entities. But I don't believe that an adequate description of aliens is demons. I believe that aliens have more to do with hybrids, genetic manipulation, mixing the genes of animals and giants and angels and all kinds of stuff. I think they're more, in some of them, there's all kinds of creatures out there that people don't know about, but a lot of them are more material than they are spiritual. But I certainly believe in demons. But there's also a difference between disembodied spirits and fallen angels, and obviously these corporeal entities that people encounter are not disembodied. In many cases, they have bodies. They can be killed. When they crash in their saucers, they die. So we're dealing with, that's a very loaded question. There's a lot of confusion surrounding it. So my answer, are aliens demons? My answer is no, they're demonic, but they're not demons.
Okay.
I can explain that, Doug, further. The fallen angels can morph, they can shapeshift, if you will, into any form. They can take on, the scripture says even Satan can appear as an angel of light. In the book of Adam and Eve, which is not in the Bible, which is not on par with the scripture, but you have multiple instances of Satan basically appearing to Adam and Eve in different forms and shapes, and God in his mercy comes immediately and strips off that shape-shifting persona. Fallen angels do not seek to inhabit human bodies. Let me make that clear. Fallen angels absolutely have contempt for humanity, because that was the basis of Lucifer's pitch to them to get them to rebel. The 1/3 of the angels in heaven, however many that might be, rebelled with him. So a demon is a disembodied spirit, and that's what people don't understand. You can have if a fallen angel had genetically manipulated the DNA of an animal, you can have a hybrid chimera demon also. But all of their appetites are for human flesh, human destruction, and basically, even in the animal kingdom of fallen, perverted animals, human sex. When you read about the Greek mythology, it's loaded with basically bestiality. That's why in the Old Testament, God said any man that lied with a beast was supposed to, in other words, was having sexual intercourse with an animal or vice versa, was to be put to death, and not only them, but the animal too. And people they've never been able to explain it until this time in this day and age. So there are three entities. The giants are never called demons. The giants are never called fallen angels. The giants in Hebrew are called a Rephaim, or the Rapha, R-A-P-H-A. There's only two times in the Old Testament, one in Genesis 6 and one in Numbers 13:33, both before the flood and after the flood, that the word angel, translated as Nephilim, is used in the Old Testament. So anyway, that's the thing. I think the introduction to Genesis 6 Volume 2 lays that out. But I agree with Tim. there are extra-dimensionals. And the Native Americans call, obviously, windwalkers. They have all different terminology. Shapeshifters in the book Little Creatures are called changelings. But the standard root of it all is fallen angels doing Satan's bid to corrupt everything that God had created. You want to talk about atmospheric corruption? Everybody will talk about geoengineering. Let's call it what it is, atmospheric corruption. You want to talk about the pollution in the ocean? And let me just throw this in. I put up on my website today, the Pacific Ocean covers 30.9% of the Earth's surface area. I think it's 65 million something 49 thousand or 65,049,000 square miles. Well, when a third of the life in the sea dies, and oceanic people are telling me, when I say oceanic, oceanographers, biologists, marine biologists, chemists are talking about a third of the life in the sea dying. Well, that's Revelation chapter 8, verse 9. So again, it's fascinating. Someone says, well, a real third would be 33%. Oh, I can answer that one too. Where the Pacific meets the Gulf, hello, guess what? Where the Panama Canal, someone says, well, listen, quit looking for excuses and look to the Bible because it's telling us what's going to happen. If that is the case, and we are a lot closer, we are in the end times. We're not approaching the end times. Go ahead and give Tim another question.
All right. This comes from Bailey, listening live out of Spokane. Okay, this is a two-part question for Tim. And by the way, before I ask this question, I just want to say, folks, in the revised, updated, expanded Genesis 6 Giants, the preface to the second edition, Steve Quayle does a marvelous job of really standardizing for industry standards Nephilim, Rephaim, and demons. So that's fantastic. But this to Tim, with respect to all of the ancient architecture, and forgive my words if they're improper, all of the ancient architecture which you have seen, in particular the in South America, and even this would go with the pyramids in Egypt and other locations. Are we not to believe that these were built by aliens? In other words, what she's asking basically is, aliens from outer space had nothing to do with the construction of any of these cities, technology, the development of technology, or anything like that. You're saying these came from the fallen angels, and then through the lineage into man. Is that what you're saying? That's her question.
That depends on how you define aliens. That depends entirely on how you define aliens. The word alien is very deceptive. All it really means is alien to the human race. In other words, not human. So when the ancient alien people talk about aliens, they're talking about beings from the star system of the Pleiades or something like that came in their ships to help mankind or whatever, to mine minerals on the earth. That's a very limited use of the word alien. It's almost like they claim exclusivity on the use of that term. Well, I protest, because the word alien, again, simply means alien to the human race, not human. And that certainly describes the litany of creatures that were created from what Steve just described, the sexual intercourse of angels with animals and with human beings. The Book of Giants lays out that these 200 watchers, fallen angels, specifically selected and strategically selected 200 kinds of animals on the earth to copulate with, in other words, to have sex with, in order to procreate beings. Now, understand that when angels are superior in intellect and many other capacities to the human race, far superior to us. So when they copulate with animals, you're not going to get some dumb beast. You're going to get these creatures that are intelligent, that are conscious, that are sentient. And these creatures are going to be under the tutorship of their parents, which is what the Book of Enoch talks about. are going to be able to employ high technology and build things such as vimanas, such as flying machines, such as pyramids. And these creatures are then probably going to be able to get off planet with their technology. So some of these entities might have gone off world, gone on the moon, gone on Mars, built civilizations out there. I believe most everything stems from the Genesis 6 narrative. I also believe that some of this might be have its origins in a pre-Adamic age, and so again, the word alien, there's one exclusive use of that word that's dominating the whole conversation out there, and that is astronauts, aliens from different star systems coming to Earth. For me, what's much more logical and certainly what seems to me more biblical is that these creatures started here, and if they're out there, it's because they started here and went out there, in my opinion. And so when we talk about did aliens build some of this stuff, that all depends on your definition of aliens. If you're talking about non-human entities, then my answer would be yes, they probably did build some of this stuff, or at least hybrid entities that maybe were part human, part this, part that, or maybe part angel, part animal. Then the answer is yes, aliens did build that, or probably had a hand in building that. So it's again that and I think that's throwing a lot of people off. It's not just aliens or giants. It's people have to understand that aliens includes what happened in Genesis 6, what happened with the fallen angels, the corruption of the genomes of all life on Earth created a litany of sentient beings that were not human. And who knows how many. There's a lot of calculations, very well thought out calculations of the antediluvian world that project billions of people being alive during the antediluvian times. Who knows how many chimeras were walking around? Who knows how many entities were walking around that were far superior to the human race in intellect because of the genetics of the fallen angels. So actually, the biblical view, the view that Steve and I have, is far more logical and allows for all the different variables to work together under the umbrella of Scripture. So that's my answer to that.
Gotcha. Yeah, very eloquently stated too, and I think that's a hang-up or a tripwire for a lot of people. Thank you for explaining it.
We do have a question from Arnold. This is to both and/or Steve and Tim. Why are they trying to open the portal to let beings in if they already have been here working with the government? How did they get here if CERN is supposed to open the portal? It seems like they already have a portal open. And do you think that the Naples earthquake could be a blood sacrifice for CERN, since it was around the time CERN turned up the volumes and then the earthquake happened? So the first part of that,
the portals,
the portals being there already versus CERN opening them, and then the CERN.
Sure, I have an answer for that. Jesus said the gates of hell, plural. Also, the book of Revelation teaches there's a specific time when Satan and all his fallen angels will be cast down to earth. I have another answer for that. Imagine that the fallen angels who have either been bound, the ones that have been bound, their sons and their daughters, in other words, their progeny that were dead in the flood. Imagine that those spirits have been held in a prison, that the stargates have kept out of our dimension. And imagine that through the technology of the fallen angels and their duped, there you go, that's duped and stupid human assistants, okay? The people that want to believe that somehow Lucifer has their best interests at heart, that they are going to produce bodies for these spirits to inhabit. Do you follow? In other words, they've been disembodied spirit. That's what a demon is. And demon is a disembodied spirit of a giant. The giant are the offspring of the fallen angels. The book of Enoch also deals with that they had dreams. In other words, the giants had dreams and the fallen angels had dreams that the flood was going to come to destroy. And I got to share something. What Tim just said about they started here and went to the stars, the book of Obadiah only has one chapter. and I don't know which verses, 17, 18, I believe 16, 17, and 18 is right about in there. It basically says, though you set your nest amongst the stars, yet will I bring you down. A lot of people, and I am one of them, have postulated that many of the fallen angels used their hypertech to leave the planet in anticipation of the flood. The flood did not destroy fallen angels. Listen, again, fallen angels don't die, okay? They can be chained, they can be imprisoned, they can be overcome through the name and the blood of Jesus, but they don't like to inhabit human bodies. Now, saying that, they can shape-shift and take on a human body of their making, their likeness, and their choices. In other words, while they hate humanity, they're willing to take the form of humanity in order to deceive it. This is the biggest stumbling block, and I think, Joe, you asked me this, and maybe even a couple of years ago whenever we did the show. Jesus said, in heaven, the angels are neither given or taken, in heaven, when people die, they are as the angels. They're not given or taken in marriage. That's heaven. On earth, the whole point of the gates opening is to allow another and final onslaught. I maintain that with the incubus and succubus experiences of Hollywood stars selling it as something cool, where it used to be repulsive, it would be repulsive to have some creature from a hellish nightmare, having sex with a pretty starlet. Now that's to be, how do I say this? There is no end to the depravity of mankind under the influence of a devil who's seeking to destroy them unless Jesus stops it on behalf of the believer. That's why Jesus said, behold, again, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. And that's why he's using terminology, the dragon was wroth. Okay, who's the dragon? Classically, and I've got a whole series of research chapter on dragons in little creatures and enough footnotes to make the skeptics happy. But the point being is that this is what we're up against. So to answer that brother's question specifically, some have already come through the advanced guard. We're talking about all. And what does all mean? All means there's nothing less, nothing more, all who fit the category of fallen angels being cast down to earth, trying through the science of fallen man and the wisdom of fallen angels to combine to produce bodies for the disembodied spirits of their children. And 99%, I've never heard of a giant being a vegetarian, okay? I never heard of a giant turning down a good human for a meal. And I'm talking in antiquity now. Guess what? If I were to come up with a TV slogan, they're back and they're hungry. By the way, I think somebody's already used that. But the point being is that the destruction of humanity now is at the precipice of all of us, okay? This is something, you're just a fear-monger. Well, I got to tell you something. Fear-monger? Well, look up the word monger. I doubt it. But the way that truth is always received, it's initially rejected. Then it's mocked, ridiculed, and scorned. Then the next step is the messenger is attacked, ridiculed, and scorned. The next step is, at the minute there's evidence to undermine that the ridicule, scorn, and mocking was absolutely based in fear. I'll tell you this, I can sense fear in the emails of the people that basically email me and tell me I'm a fearmonger, a doomsdayer, or whatever. Someone says, you're an alarmist. You better believe I'm an alarmist, and I've been sounding it for 25 years on talk radio, and evidently not enough people recognize that not only did the country burn down, but that smoke they smell is coming off the plans of the Illuminati out to destroy them. In other words, if they have to singe the earth, bioattack it, use volcanoes, they're going to do what they're going to do. And that's why, Doug, on the 1st of May, I think that's Friday night, Pastor Langford and I will be leading everybody in communion at the start of the show. And we're going to do an interesting show. On the second hour, we're going to give you all of the instances that time allows, of course, of God's people in a dead what would you say, in a corner facing only death and destruction, but God made a way. The third hour, we're going to be praying over the phone. That's when we'll do our praying for everybody, that God is going to infuse his listening audience worldwide with the Spirit and the power of the Holy Ghost. So the point being is this, is that this is critical. For 40 days, I'm going to say this, and I'll put it up on my website, the day of May 1st. For 40 days, I'm only asking this, to spend time in the Lord in prayer, in personal repentance, and I'll put up the list of things we're going to pray for with a hand of dirt. The hand of dirt, you can hold it, and all you need to do is hold that dirt and thank the Lord for his redeeming you, because that's what you are made of. If you are a descendant of Adam, you are made out of the dirt. And that's to keep you in the attitude of without the Spirit of God, you would be nothing. How cool is this, Doug? We start out at the show without the Spirit of God, that clump of dirt would be nothing, but God breathed into that man who he had formed as the greatest sculptor in the universe. I believe it was Jesus, based on Colossians 1:16 and 17, and then breathed into man the breath of life. And like I said, the image of my mind is Adam awakes, knowing who God is, knowing the plan of redemption, being given the wisdom of God because he's created in the image and likeness of God, and I believe he gave the Lord, his creator, a hug, and I believe that hug is what God wants to restore to his people. How cool is that? Jesus said, henceforth, I call you no longer servants but friends. That means Jesus is my Savior, he's my Lord, he's my King, he's my righteousness, he's my purpose, he's your everything I'm claiming, but he's also your friend. I'll tell you what, it's not the Christians chopping off the heads of the Muslims. It's not the Jews chopping off the heads of the Muslims. It's the Muslims chopping off everybody's head. It's not the Christians or Jews selling meat, human meat, in the markets of Syria. It's not the Christians or Jews. And look, let me share this. I know Pastor Langford and I did a show on it. I know there are Jews who call themselves Jews and are not. I know that, okay? But I'm telling everybody, if you stay focused on that issue, you're going to miss seeing how the devil's using everybody, because the Bible doesn't say the whole world lies in the evil one, only in Israel. No, he said the whole world lies in the evil one, period. The whole cosmos. How great is the redemption of God when you understand how far man and creation fell. That's when you'll start to get a glimpse of how great the redemption, the blood of Jesus, the name of Jesus, and the purpose of God in all of our lives through his salvation. So that's what we're going to be talking about on Friday night, and I believe if you'll be praying and taking this to heart, again, I'm saying all the Lord said for me to tell people, one meal. It's kind of like 1 hour. You know, hey, every one of us can go without one meal. Every one of us can grab a handful of dirt and say, thank you, Lord, that this is what I was created out of, and without your Spirit, I'd be that clump of dirt. But now you've made me with you a king and a priest to God forever, and that's a pretty neat thing. So, Doug, I just had to get that out there. Go ahead and ask the next question for Tim.
Well, I just want to recap this for Friday, Steve. I apologize, but I want to make this clear to the listeners. Friday, you and Pastor David Langford. First hour is going to be communion. The second hour is going to be the tell me again. Tell people again. Roughly, just a summary.
Well, the second hour. Second hour is going to be all the instances in the Old Testament and in the New when God's people were faced against odds that they could not overcome in their own strength. I can't get it across. I have failed. Only God can cause this to happen. I have failed to be able to articulate that every Christian who is, obviously you've seen the war on Christians in the military, that's coming to the streets of America. Every Christian is destined for destruction. That's not going to happen by the grace of God. That is not going to happen because God's people are going to stand up. And Doug, that's the thing that's the tragedy. That's what makes me basically just want to, and look, I thank God I'm not giving up. Thank God for intercessory prayer. But banging your head against a wall for 25 years, and that's the point I've been making all along, and now it's in process, and people still think that, and I will say this, the people that think we're fearmongers or warmongers or doomsdayers, those people are not born of the kingdom of God. They will never see eternity with a King of glory. They won't, because they won't acknowledge the fact that God has certain requirements, Matthew 18 being at the top of the list. And isn't it interesting? Unforgiveness and failing to forgive is what opens a person up to demon possession. So I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah,
and let me share this, Doug. On the question you just asked me in the email, if the elderly person, if they can't communicate it in email, I've learned that, and I'm sorry to be such a stickler on this, that having done 5 years or 3 hours a day or whatever, call-in radio, it sets a precedent. I don't want to do it. I'm not afraid to answer on-air questions. It's just we're trying to maximize our time. We're already, 22 minutes away from the end.
Yeah, understood. And thank you, Steve, for addressing that.
In this question, we'll start with Tim. Has anybody heard of angelic script, a certain kind of handwriting or hieroglyph of the angels?
You're asking me?
Yeah, Tim. Go ahead.
Well, back in the Elizabethan era, John Dee, famous sorcerer, who was most likely the tutor of Francis Bacon, developed a Enochian angel script, which he admitted that he developed under the tutorship of spirits. And so, people have developed what they claim to be the language of angels, written or spoken form. But I believe that that's all in the occultic realm, in the realm of sorcery, witchcraft.
Is that like automatic?
So the answer is yes.
What's that? No, this question is coming from Doug Hagman here. Is that like automatic writing or something? Is that what you're referring to?
Automatic writing is different. Again, in the case of John Dee, who was a Queen Elizabeth sorcerer, court sorcerer, he actually developed a language based on numerics, based on astrology, a very complex written language. Automatic writing is mainly done in the New Age arenas, where a person is supposedly possessed by an entity who uses their body, their mind, to write something, to transcribe something directly for them. That's what automatic writing is. So in other words, there's a human being writing, but it's not the words of the human being. It's the words of the entity that is influencing or has possessed the human being.
Understood. Okay. Very good. Joe? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. I do have a question here from a Jennifer. She says that there's an increase in animal attacks and other things of nature happening. Wondering if the restrainer or God is moving his hedge of protection and Holy Spirit away from the earth and allowing, the animals of the earth to devour people and other natural things to come about that would not be so severe before due to his protection.
Well, I want to deal with that. I don't believe God removes the Holy Spirit. I believe that the restrainer is the angel Michael, who's the prince of the people. So does Pastor Langford. Saying that, though, the nature of animals, we know that obviously the animal attacks are mentioned as a curse that comes along with disobedience. And, Joe, I would say this, that just as we talked earlier, people have got to understand that there are evil spirits born of angels and animals that will repossess those animals and reanimate them with their old appetites. And guess what? They in their world, there's only one thing that tastes good, and that's humans.
Ooh.
I hope you understand what I just said there.
Yeah.
That animals, there are fallen angel animal hybrids that were sentient. That's what Tim said. And the fact is that when those animals were slain, the spirit, which was a hybrid spirit, obviously walks the earth. As the animals are even reanimated, those spirits will come back into them. So as the gates of hell are opening, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some of the most abhorrent, most evil, and wicked animal behavior you've ever seen.
Wow. Okay. And that Tim, is there anything you want to add to that? I mean, that's
no,
wow.
I just agree with what he said.
Yeah,
it's a frightening thought, but I think that's a very dynamic point that that there are sorcerers and occultic groups on the planet right now that are trying to find the keys to, scientifically speaking, to animate some of these mythical creatures. And I think Steve is absolutely right that the spirits that once inhabited these creatures before they were killed are going to come back into them, and that's not a good thing for the human race.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. All right. This question is for either one of you. From Gillian, listening live from Australia, wanting to know, prefaces the question by saying that he's going to be contacting you to order your book, Steve, but wanting to know where the dinosaurs fit into this, if at all. Steve, I'll just pop it over to you because I know you addressed this in Genesis 6 Giants, but go ahead and field that question.
Well, I'll tell you this, obviously when you're dealing with dinosaurs, the standard, we in Bozeman, Montana have the Museum of the Rockies, one of the most famous paleontologists in the world here, Jack Horner, that the movie Jurassic Park was, pretty much he was the lead character in the movie. So the point that I'm saying is I'm familiar with I'm familiar with classic science where the dinosaur means terrible lizard, okay? Now what's fascinating to me is I believe that's a perfect example of fallen angels and their genetic, and let's just call it angel science, production. I don't buy the classic timetable, and the point is that Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, all of the great, if you will, pre-Adamic civilizations, or post, if you take that position, all were destroyed for the same thing of combining animal and human DNA. I think they were genetic experiments, alterations, and I believe the suddenness of their destruction, whether people want to claim it was the methane in the atmosphere, a cometary strike, a virus, whatever, I believe it was God's judgment on that abhorrent, if you will, creation. God didn't create them. Terrible lizard, I got news for you. I mean, you didn't turn Adam and Eve into Freddy and the Queen of Hell, So I think that, the tree is known by the fruit it bears.
Okay. All right. This question is directed, and we've got a lot of questions here. This question is directed to Tim. This from Betty Jean, I believe it is, in East Texas, wanting to know, with respect to the various archaeological sites you've visited, were there any? Well, it's a paragraph-long question. I'll just sum it up by asking it this way: any flying machine artifacts? That's the best way I can ask. Okay, that you found.
No.
Okay, and why not?
I didn't find any evidence of that. I would have to assume that if there was any evidence of that, it would have been taken a long time ago, by one of the factions that's disappearing those kind of artifacts, and has been for years. But we did go out on Lake Titicaca and interview some of the natives concerning UFOs and some demonic creatures that they claim are out there. But in terms of actual finding anything that might be an ancient flying machine, I doubt you'd ever come across that unless you literally dug it up yourself. Okay, all right. And this is kind of along the same lines, but this is directed to Steve. Steve, Rex or Rox, I'm not sure. It looks like he misspelled his own first name. Wanting to know about DNA of giants in use today, and in particular, has there been official DNA, to your knowledge, been recovered from places like Babylon and other locations? Yes. Okay. I had a 4-star general active duty tell me that they went in before the war, and when the BBC broke the story about the tomb of Gilgamesh, who was basically
half interesting, half fallen angel, half human, they got his literal DNA. And absolutely they have the DNA, with no questions asked. That's why Tim and the film crew, both in Sardinia and Peru and Bolivia, are so followed. Let me share this with you. I know this is hard for people to understand, but everything we do, to the best of our ability, is followed. Believe me, had anything been turned over, it would have only been by the grace of God. I'm not going to go into detail, but we have a system to get it out beyond anybody's ability to tamper with it at the point it's discovered, okay? And that's why, we need people's help financially. We need it prayerfully. But again, I would just tell people, if you really want to have a legacy, how would you like to join with us in uncovering basically the most, I don't know that that's a real word. I was going to say most hidden. I was going to say hiddenness, but the most covered up story in the world, and be a part of it. See, that's what you're doing when you're praying for us and when you're helping us, And again, that's why, it's so amazing, because what we're seeing now, Doug, is I believe that God is warning. You see, I understand. Look, I know Jade Helm as well, if not better than most people, because 20-some years ago, not 20 years ago, excuse me, let me just get my time right. This is 2015. So, actually close to that, when I first went on talk radio, is when the former head of the EPA for the Western United States gave me that information on the red list, blue list, and green list, okay? He also gave me a term called curative process. One of the things that people don't understand is these monsters, and I use that term in its fullest euphemism, that want to kill everybody. They want to kill off the doctors. They want to kill off the nurses. They want to kill off the primary health care preserve. And, oh, by the way, if you hit 75, die. Now, guess what? These people who are even old, isn't it amazing that 90-year-old old crows from the Illuminati, whether they're from the House of Rothschild or Rockefeller or whoever, they want to kill off everybody, of course, except them. Well, the point is that who knows who those entities really are? And I maintain that, and I'm going to say this, I maintain that fallen angels rule the fallen world behind the scenes and take the appearance of whoever they want. And I don't know what they do with the original. If the original is given a new body and they get to start their hellish run at evil over, or they kill them and basically they assume their identity, okay? That's for a whole different, that's a mind-blowing thought, okay? But I think it's really important that people begin to understand. You cannot address these issues in the natural mind. You have to seek the wisdom of the Lord. You have to do your homework. And that's why guys like Tim and I, Tom Horn and others, Chris Putnam, those of us who are into the ancient, and by the way, you know this, there are other people coming out saying this and that and everything, and they challenge what I say, and I said, where were you 25 years ago? Where were you? You weren't any place on. It's like this. Thus saith the Lord. Here's a phony prophecy. The Russians will attack the United States. Oh, yeah, but where were you 25 years ago? You see? So what I'm saying is there will always be after-the-fact critics and after-the-fact experts. But the point is that what we're trying to present is a systematic approach to history that explains what the churches basically wet diaper means they won't take on, because number one, they don't want to lose any congregants who might pay their tithe, but they're too frightened of the ramifications of dealing with the truth. And if you think that's too harsh, well, the world's gone to hell in the last 20 years because let's just say this: the milk, mother's milk, was never taken away, and the meat of the word given. So the highways and byways, I want to share this with new Christians and with returning backsliders. God will speed you up. Here's a promise from heaven. God will speed you up, get you to where you need to be with the understanding you need to be as this stuff unfolds. And I believe Tim and his crew are doing that. I believe that when you start to see the images along with the words, that's why we're going to TV. We've got our studio setting it up, and it's going to be fireside chats. I teased him and I said, well, Tim, it's probably not fair, but we should do it on the end times and call it As the World Burns, And the point, I'm just kidding, it's not going to be called that, but the thing is that people have got to see and hear, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah, you did, Steve. And we have one more question from Randy Conway.
Yeah, I just sent it to you, Steve, but go ahead.
I wanted to try to get this in on there.
All
okay. Right. Talking about Tim, does Steve or Tim have a theory on regulating or regarding the limitations of guarding the sites that Tim visited? What are they protecting and what are they hiding? I know you kind of covered this a little bit in the first hour, Tim. If you want to reiterate what you think it is that they're protecting.
Well, it's a complicated situation depending on what government you're dealing with. I can tell you that I believe, we didn't even really get into this, but I believe that the Vatican is ultimately concealing a lot of the knowledge of the ancient world for many reasons. But specifically, if you get into these small countries like Bolivia, Bolivia's a relatively poor, not a relatively poor, it's a very poor country. The politics of Bolivia are corrupt. It's like mafia kind of politics. They're not as organized, obviously, as the United States or even a second world country. So when you get into, like, let's take Pumapunka, for example. If you're dealing with what's under the ground there, you're dealing with a government led by Evo Morales, the Bolivian president, who hates America, hates the imperialists, as he calls us, and so his desire would be to keep us out of it. His desire would be to keep the Western powers away from what's ever there. He doesn't want us to have anything to do with it. But here's the thing. What might he be doing with Russia or Iran? I mean, I got the sense that it's very. Steve mentioned that they've just bought jets from Russia. It's interesting that certainly they're not going to be offered or are going to purchase any kind of jets from the United States or the UK. Their buddies are Russia and Iran, and of course all the other mafiosos out there. So basically, it's complicated. In the grand scheme, you have the Vatican. In the grand scheme, you have the NSA. In the grand scheme, you have the organizations that are run by the Illuminati. In the smaller kind of localized situations, like in Bolivia, you have these petty leaders who are perhaps have an idea of what they're sitting on. My guess is that Evo Morales doesn't even really understand what's under the ground, but the Russians do and are probably there. I would not doubt that there are tunnelways already built underneath the whole Tiwanaku. This is just speculation, that there are tunnels already under there where they are already and have been for years extracting the technology, extracting the DNA, taking out the sarcophaguses of giants and of chimeras. I think that's the MO on a world scale. So on the surface level, you're dealing with petty tyrants like Evo Morales, who are just trying to keep the American imperialists out and deal with his buddies in Russia. And then on the grander scale, you're dealing with the Vatican, you're dealing with the Illuminati, and obviously the Chinese are in there too at this point.
Very good. Steve, go ahead.
By the way, that's totally accurate. What Tim just said is totally accurate.
All right.
4 minutes left, gentlemen.
Go ahead, Steve. Take us out.
Well, I want to read this by Randy Conway. He, by the grace of God, he's one of the guys that just sent that question. But you'll love this, Tim. We may want to, with Randy's permission, integrate it into one of our documentaries. He said this is Stargates, and I don't know when he wrote it, but he just sent it to me tonight. I can't say it better than this. As gravity increases and time slows, a passage is open to an unknown dimension. To those who know it as a gateway, though some deny they're real and consider it science fiction, but fiction has no empirical proofs or eyewitness testimony. The writings of antiquity testified to truth, not hypothesis. Beware the opening of these gates will bring a global apostasy. Educated fools play with these passageways, thinking they are in control, but they see not the portentous threats that lie beyond the blackness of these holes. Many have come and many have gone, but we are still searching for the keys that will allow us to open the gates that lead to mystery. Now there has been much talk and speculation that governments have found such gates, and they're willing to shed much blood or even go to war to keep their secrets safe. Authorities around the world guard the ancient sites, hiding or denying the existence of what was moved in the dark of night. Stories, myths, and legends are told, passed down from ancient tribes, tribes from every tongue and nation whose story is all described. An ancient race of giants and the pathways through which they fly, an ancient race of hybrids that desire to see that all flesh dies. Wow, is this pertinent. The believers intently watch the signs to be prepared for their return. The scoffers remain ignorant and choose not to listen or discern. The words of the prophets give warning or the evidence that abounds, while the elite are guarding secrets, hoping the truth is never found. That is, the truth should not be found out by the masses of the general population, for that might set the masses free, and we must keep the masses in sedation. If the truth were preached and the people reached, there could be mass salvation, and that would hamper Satan's plan for New World Order aberrations. There are beasts that come with the opening of dimensions we cannot see, and Satan's minions are seeking personal greatness through evil loyalties. But their greatness will not be long-lived, for the beast is but an incarnation of a defeated fallen angel that will one day be forced to make proclamation that Jesus Christ is the only one true King of kings and Lord of lords. If the gateways are open, will we then see foretold the day of the Lord? Men remain in denial of the judgment of the Lord, and they deny his word. They are too afraid to see the truth, and so they call the truth absurd. Now those things which God buried in deep waters of the flood were buried to cleanse the earth and to protect the seed within the blood. The seed remained protected, and Jesus came to redeem the man. He offered to all eternal life, and those who accept him are covered by his hand. If you are not covered by the blood of Jesus Christ when the gates are opened, you are at risk of life. Men must seek the truth while it may be found. The cost will be too great when the evil has been unbound. The stories, myths, and legends have ancient foundations that are not just passed down orations. The true watchmen are not barkers spouting lies to dramatize and create a great sensation. Those who hide the truth are not our great protectors. They hide behind lies for personal elevation. The clues of time and the clues left on the earth reveal the truth of the former altered mutations. Now I am prepared to make a multi-dimensional journey through a gate that is straight. There are thieves and robbers who will attempt to do the same through their hidden stargates. Unfortunate for them, they will not travel through, but that is not to say the gates will not be used. Many will come through to rule all men, and then tribulation will be loosed. That, my dear brother Randy, is probably one of the most prophetic poems I have ever read. Tim, isn't that amazing?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Gentlemen,
Doug, I think we're out of time. Blessings, Randy. Thank you.